Chapter 2048. Good things must not be missed. Yang Chen's interest was piqued. He put this thing aside and continued to look at the other Immortal Cave magic treasures. In any case, he knew that there was something fishy. The shopkeeper also admitted that there might be a few good things inside. He might as well buy them and slowly decipher them. To Yang Chen's surprise, there was more than one such Immortal Cave manor. Yang Chen looked at 3 in a row, all of which had the same specifications. Except for the different layout of the manor, everything else was basically the same. Even the price was about the same. With this, Yang Chen had 4 small Immortal Caves that met the requirements. The rest were either big Immortal Caves or herbal gardens. There were more than a dozen of them. Although the number was not much, the price added up was very outrageous. Just these dozen herbal gardens and Immortal Caves added together would cost hundreds of jin of top-grade spirit stones. A few hundred kilograms of top-grade spirit stones were just a drop in the bucket for Yang Chen. Yang Chen didn't care. He gathered all the magic weapons of the Immortal's cave that he had seen to his side. He said very heroically, "I want all of these. Are there any space magic weapons?" The shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion thought that Yang Chen, who seemed to be an earthly immortal, would at most take one. He did not expect that Yang Chen would not even bargain and take all of them. The shopkeeper was shocked. A business with hundreds of jin of top-grade spirit stones was a big business, no matter where it was. When he thought that such a big business could be done in just a few moments, the shopkeeper could not help but feel excited. This was a big customer. He could not be neglected. Dare I ask, is it Grandmaster Yang? Hearing that Yang Chen wanted all the spatial magic treasures, and even more, the shopkeeper was not an ignorant person. He immediately thought of the most popular spatial magic treasure buyer in the business world, Yang Chen. At the same time, the shopkeeper also wanted to slap himself in the face. From the beginning, when Yang Chen asked him to take out all the space magic weapons, he should have thought of it. If he knew that it was Grandmaster Yang who was an alchemist, the price would have been raised by at least 50%. Grandmaster Yang was a rare rich man. Why would he care about hundreds of jin of top-grade spirit stones? That's right. Yang Chen nodded. His identity was not a secret, and no one in a marketplace would use force. It did not matter if he told the shopkeeper. Since it's Grandmaster Yang, I still have a few trump cards. I'll bring them to you right away. The smile on the shopkeeper's face became even more obvious. He quickly turned around and came out with a few more items. The shopkeeper who was walking over had a look of reluctance on his face. Of course, it wasn't because he was reluctant to sell his goods, but because the time was too short and the quality of the goods was almost the same. He didn't have enough time to change the price to a higher one. Just like before, Yang Chen checked them one by one, then nodded and said, "I want all of these. Let's settle the bill." There were a few of them that were obviously of higher quality. Of course, their prices were also quite good. At the very least, ordinary cultivators would definitely feel their hearts bleed if they saw these black-hearted prices. The funny thing was that there were also 2 Tanley manors with similar prices. It was not easy for the shopkeeper to raise the price. Because of this, it was difficult for the shopkeeper to raise the price. The onlookers were the enemies of the merchants. The cultivators were doing business for a long time. It was only a cup of tea's time. A total of 983 jin of top-grade spirit stones. The shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion was absolutely good at accounting. He did not even need to use an abacus. He directly calculated the answer in his mind. Okay. Yang Chen nodded and agreed. He put the total of more than 20 space magic weapons into his chinquin bag. He would have to pay the spirit stones. Grandmaster, do you want to round it up? The shopkeeper knew that Yang Chen was straightforward. At this time, one more business was one more business. His shabby pavilion could really be considered as not opening for business for 3 years. It was not easy to meet such a big customer. Of course, he had to do a good job. Shopkeeper, do you still have a space magic weapon that you haven't taken out? When Yang Chen heard the word round up, he was amused. This shopkeeper really only had eyes for money. There's one more thing. The shopkeeper encountered a big business. He could not care about anything else. He gritted his teeth and pointed. Grandmaster, what do you think of my small shop? It is also a space magic weapon, and it is also refined by an expert. including 17 gene of top-grade spirit stones, a total of 1,000 gene. How about it? Listening to the shopkeeper, Yang Chun could not help but admire him. The shops in the marketplace were basically space magic weapons. Otherwise, if there were too many customers, they would not be able to accommodate them. This was especially true for big businesses. Each shop looked small, but after entering, there were pavilions and pavilions. There was no need to worry about the number of customers. However, this small shop of the shabby pavilion could barely be regarded as a space magic weapon. It was too small. Even if it was not fully opened, it was estimated that at most it was a 10 li manor. The part that was not shown was probably the shopkeeper's own residence. This guy was also a wonderful person. When he found that he could make money, he even sold the shop he lived in. He was really a real businessman. Okay, I don't need more than 10 gene. Count them all in. Yang Chen did not care. He was rich and overbearing. Since they had delivered themselves to his door, then he would count them as one. When he came in, he found that the shop was a bit new. Maybe the last business to sell the shop was not long ago. When Yang Chun came out of the shabby pavilion, there was no more shabby pavilion in the marketplace. To be exact, there was no more shabby pavilion because the whole shop was sold to Yang Chun. The shopkeeper did not lose anything in this business. On average, he sold them at least 4 times the original price. Even if he had lost his shop and a place to live, the shopkeeper still kept boasting to Yang Chun. Grandmaster really has a good eye. There's so many things, and each of them is absolutely worth it. Wait for the small shop to go and buy a batch of new products. We will welcome Grandmaster again in the future. All the goods have been put into the shopkeeper's Cosmos bag. The shop and the 20 or so space-type magical weapons belonged to Yang Chun. The shopkeeper's face was filled with a happy smile. Just from the radiance on his face, it could be seen that he had made a big profit this time. The surrounding cultivators also looked at Yang Chun and the shopkeeper strangely. The people who often came here knew about the business of the shabby pavilion. Even the shop was sold. No one knew how many spirit stones this young cultivator had been cheated of. However, they were not responsible for the sales of the goods in the marketplace. It was not like they were cheated. No one would stand up for them. This time he got 4 large Immortals caves, and there were 6 possibilities, one of which was the 10-mile manor of the Super Immortals cave. Yang Chen was also in a good mood. He slowly paced and looked around the market, waiting for the girls to finish shopping so that they could enjoy the fun of treasure hunting together. He believed that everyone would be very happy if they found a Super Immortal cave in the 10-mile manor. Chapter 2049. The market was not big, so the women did not spend too much time shopping. In less than a day, all of them returned to Yang Chen's side. The women who came back began to show the good things they had bought in the Dragon Palace hidden deep underground. This was also a happy moment for everyone when they shared their spoils of war, and it was also the most lively time for the Dragon Palace ceremony. Along the way, this has become a fixed program for everyone after passing through various markets, and it was very popular with everyone. In addition to a lot of space magic weapons bought for Gong Sunling, the others were bought according to personal preferences and uses. Anyway, Yang Chun was rich, and any of the women was a rich woman, so they would not hesitate to buy things. In addition to all kinds of fancy magic weapons, there were also some beautiful jewelry. Of course, these jewelry had their own special uses, not just for beauty. Everyone introduced their gains to each other and shared their shopping fun. This was a happy moment for the women. Even if Yang Chun was not interested in shopping, he listened patiently with a smile. As they talked, everyone turned the topic to Yang Chun. Several of them heard about the feat of Yang Chun buying other people's stores. One by one, they laughed and trembled. After laughing, they also asked Yang Chun to talk about his shopping experience. Yang Chun did not hide it. This was a happy moment for everyone, and it was good to talk about it to make the beauty smile. After talking about his shopping experience very readily, the women were also stunned after laughing. 1,000 gene of top-quality spirit stones bought more than 20 space magic weapons. Among them, there were 6 or 7 at the level of the 10-mile manor. Even if the shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion was telling the truth, and there might be good things inside, wasn't this too much of a scam? However, the women were still very convinced by their husband's eyesight. Many of them had experienced the experience of Yang Chun finding treasures from various legendary materials. Since her husband could buy these space magic weapons at more than several times the price, there must be something good inside. More than 20 space-type magic weapons were placed in front of the women. No one let Yang Chun say which one he liked. Everyone began to rely on their own eyesight to judge which one it was. This was an interesting game, and everyone was in high spirits. Yang Chen's wives and concubines all participated, and even the maids were not left behind. Everyone picked one item and waited for Yang Chun to announce the answer. Lady Fanghua was having a good time. She even set the odds for each magic treasure. Then, everyone placed their bets and waited for Yang Chun to reveal his cards. The girls were having fun playing their little games, but Yang Chun smiled bitterly. Up until now, he still hadn't confirmed which manner he was looking for. He didn't know what method the expert who refined the super immortal cave used. But even with Yang Chen's spiritual consciousness, he still couldn't find anything fishy about it. This person really hit it deep enough. It was impossible to open the cards, so Yang Chun could only pick them up one by one and carefully explore each one again, checking and judging through various methods. As soon as they saw Yang Chun like this, the women realized that their husband was also not sure, which made everyone's interest even more high. They also joined in and checked with Yang Chun. Obviously, this was the place that Yang Chun found according to a legend, and it was premeditated for a long time. Otherwise, their husband would not buy things at several times the price for no reason. It seemed that Yang Chun had been setting up this game since a long time ago, including purchasing various space-type magic weapons in various markets. Others didn't know, but Gong Sunling understood it best. This small immortal cave now had a limited effect on a mountain river geographical map, but it was better than nothing. It was because of the large number that it played the effect of a super immortal cave. The acquisition of space-type magic weapons for such a long time was to pave the way for today's acquisition. Even Yang Chun had to pave the way for such a long time to buy things quietly. It could be imagined what kind of level it was. With the help of the women, Yang Chun used various methods to explore the harvest this time, but he did not find any abnormalities in these immortal caves. Could it be that the super immortal cave had not been put on the shelves of the shabby pavilion at this time? If this was the case, then Yang Chun would have lost a lot this time. He bought a batch of mediocre space-type magic weapons at several times the price. By the way, husband, what about the store you bought? Sun Qingxue checked them one by one and couldn't find out which one it was, so she simply gave up and asked purely out of curiosity, I would like to see what kind of store the profiteer shopkeeper sold to you. Sun Qingxue's words made Yang Chun startled, and then he realized that he did not take out the last store to make up the number. Not only that, Yang Chun finally just put away the store and never used his spiritual awareness to carefully check the store of the shabby pavilion. It was dark under the light. Yang Chun smiled bitterly and found the store from the Chinquin bag, because this store has always been on the street of the market, and it was still an owner. No matter which cultivator, as long as they were not mortal enemies and did not want to fight, they would not use their spiritual awareness to check the things that were imprinted by others. Yang Chun had always thought that this was the shopkeeper's thing, so he had never checked it. Without saying anything, he first let Xiao Tian go out and swallow the spiritual awareness imprint of the shopkeeper, and then Yang Chun began to check it carefully. The women were also unwilling to be left behind, and one by one, they all explored the store space with their spiritual awareness. It's very ordinary. Sun Qingxue was the first to withdraw. It was just a 10-mile manor, nothing special. With the withdrawal of Sun Qingxue, the women also withdrew one by one. Their spiritual awareness swept several times. It was just an ordinary small immortal's cave, and no one found any abnormalities. On the other hand, Yang Chen's spiritual awareness checked it inch by inch. When the spiritual awareness swept over an area over and over again, Yang Chun finally found something unusual, and a smile appeared on his face. Discovering an unusual point, and then deliberately looking for different things, Yang Chun quickly found several different places. By now, Yang Chun was basically certain that this was the super immortal's cave he was looking for. The three purities secret art was still strong enough, so the concealment was still found by Yang Chun. Otherwise, Yang Chun would doubt whether the three purities Tao ancestor gave him the complete three purities secret art. That's it. Yang Chun made the final decision and gave a definitive answer. Looking at the curious women, he couldn't help but smile, and then asked, "Do you want to go in and have a look?" "Let's go and have a look." Of course, the women were curious and wanted to see what kind of good things could make Yang Chun tempted, so naturally they agreed one by one. Soon, the figures of Yang Chun and the women disappeared in this shabby store. Chapter 2050. In the beginning, everyone first appeared in the shop, and the empty shelves above also showed everyone that it was a small shop not long ago. Going out from the door leading to the back, there was really a big manor outside. The shopkeeper's things were thoroughly searched. Basically, except for the empty room, there was no furniture, not even the lowest stool was left for Yang Chun. It could be seen that the shopkeeper was a profiteer. At first, the women definitely wouldn't let Yang Chun say the answer. They had to find it themselves. Yang Chun even had a definite answer. There must be something wrong with this shop's immortal's cave. If they still couldn't find it, it could only be said that this immortal's cave was too magical. Of course, Yang Chun would not spoil the mood of the girls. He made a table under a big tree in the manor, while enjoying the cool tea, and then watched the girls busy in the manor, looking for suspicious places in the manor. However, no matter how hard the women tried, even if they searched inside and out several times, they couldn't find anything wrong inch by inch. Yang Chun was not surprised by this. If he hadn't known that there was such a super immortal's cave in his previous life, this immortal's cave would probably have been ignored in front of him. Otherwise, no one would have cared about it for thousands of years in his previous life. Even the owner who got it took more than 2,000 years to discover the mystery of it by chance and get a super immortal's cave. But what was that chance? Others didn't know. This was also the reason why Yang Chun couldn't directly determine which one it was. Others had it in their hands for more than 2,000 years, and they didn't find any clues. If the women found it after coming in for a while, wouldn't it be a joke? Yang Chun didn't point it out. Anyway, the women were very hardworking. Such a game was also an alternative relaxation for them. All the women were also talented people, and none of them were willing to admit defeat easily. If even their own husband told them that there was a problem with this immortal's cave, and they still couldn't find the problem with it, wouldn't it be very embarrassing? So all the women were holding back in their hearts, and they must find the abnormality inside. Unfortunately, Yang Chun had already changed the tea leaves 3 times, using the smallest teacup, but after such a long time, the girls still had nothing. However, looking at her husband drinking tea leisurely, the women did not want to admit defeat. They could only grit their teeth and began to divide into several different areas. Each person was responsible for an area, and then they carefully checked it little by little. They probed with their divine senses, observed with their naked eyes, and sometimes even tested with their spiritual power. However, no matter what methods they used, the manor looked like an ordinary manor. Don't just look inside the manor. When Yang Chun replaced the tea leaves with the jade dragon brew, he finally gave a hint. Don't just look at the manor? This made the women feel very strange. This was originally a manor, and the edge of the manor was the courtyard wall. What else was there outside? The girls doubtfully began to inspect the edge of the space. Just as everyone expected, the courtyard wall was the edge, and beyond that was the barrier of space. He walked along the walls of the courtyard and didn't find any problems with the barrier. He was almost back to square one. Yang Chun's hint didn't work at all. After checking it a few times again, the women finally gave up this futile action. Sun Qingxue returned to Yang Chun's side and helped Yang Chun massage his shoulders, and then said coquettishly, "Husband, give me more hints. What distinguishes the inside and outside of the manor?" Yang Chun asked a question with a smile. "The courtyard wall." Gong Sunling replied subconsciously, and then suddenly realized. With a cheer, she immediately rushed to the courtyard wall. The other women also heard the hint and began to study the courtyard wall without thinking. The others began to study the courtyard wall, but Zhou Xianying simply rushed to the courtyard wall and began to attack it. Anyway, it was just a 10-mile cave residence. It was just a courtyard wall, so it didn't matter if it was broken. She wasn't afraid of breaking the super magic weapon. The super magic weapon that could tempt Yang Chun would not be afraid of the attack of a heaven immortal. As soon as Zhou Xianying started, the others also followed suit. In a short while, a large part of the courtyard wall was all shattered. This looked very normal. The only abnormal place was that there was an area about 10 feet long. Under the attack of everyone, there was no movement. This area was not far from the big tree that Yang Chun was sitting on. Now everyone could see that something was wrong. Zhou Xianying, Lady Fanghua, and a group of maids were 32 heaven immortal experts, but they couldn't do anything to a mere courtyard wall. There was a lot of potential inside. Yang Chun couldn't make a move now, because most of the divine sense in his sea of consciousness was fighting against the golden immortal tribulation. So whether it was using divine sense to explore or other things, he could only use a small part of it. But the attack of 32 heaven immortal experts couldn't do anything. The courtyard wall was so strong. What should they do next? If they couldn't break the courtyard wall, they couldn't see the world behind it. Even if the women wanted to see it, they couldn't. Shan, try to attack with all your strength. Yang Chan watched from the side and gave pointers. Sure, Shan didn't make a move just now. She was just watching. Seeing that Zhou Xianying and the others couldn't do anything, she didn't have any other thoughts. Since her husband called her name, Sure Shan naturally wouldn't hold back. She attacked with her supreme, pure yang sword Qi and slashed at the courtyard wall with all her strength. It could be said that among the women, in terms of attack power, Sure Shan's supreme, pure yang sword Qi was definitely the strongest. Although the coverage wasn't big within the attack range of the sword Qi, few people could block it. When the sword attacked, there was a sizzling sound on the courtyard wall, and a small hole appeared. After sending out this sword with all her strength, Sure Shan didn't have any excess strength and sat down softly. Sure Wushuang was already prepared and immediately helped Sure Shan to Yang Chen's side. With a hole in the wall, the solid courtyard wall was basically useless. Zhou Xianying and Lady Fanghua attacked a few times, and the courtyard wall collapsed and no longer existed. Behind the courtyard wall was a big hole, which was originally covered by the courtyard wall, and even spiritual sense couldn't penetrate it. Now that the courtyard wall had disappeared, everything was revealed, and spiritual sense could also easily explore the situation behind. The girls immediately discovered that there was an unimaginably vast space outside the cave. No matter how the women urged their spiritual sense, there was no way to explore the edge of that space. There's no need to try. This cave abode has a radius of more than 1,000,000 miles. It's the largest cave abode I've ever seen. Yang Chen stood up with Sure Shan in his arms and said to the women, "Let's go. Let's see what's inside." Chapter 2051. Out of the gap in the courtyard wall, there was an unimaginably vast space. Plains, mountains, rivers, and even the sea. Even if they were flying in the air, they couldn't see the end at a glance. "Sister, what are you doing?" Sun Qingxue originally wanted to jump to see what was here, but when she was about to turn her head and call the girls together, she found that Gao Yu was putting away all the broken fragments of the courtyard wall and couldn't help but ask. These things can shield spiritual awareness and isolate space. Gao Yu continued to move her hands and replied with a smile, "Let's study it. Maybe we can refine something interesting." Among the women, only Gao Yu was good at refining. When she said this, all the women felt that it was reasonable. While helping, they also began to reflect on whether their husband had given them too many good things recently, so that when they saw these things, they didn't think of it. This was just a small episode. After a delay of less than 10 minutes, everyone stood in the huge cave house. "Husband, how big is this place?" Zhou Xianying rarely spoke. Now that she was looking at this huge space, she asked a question that she rarely did. "I don't know." Yang Chun shook his head directly. "If you want to know, you can go out and make a spiritual awareness imprint to explore it. Sister Ling should go." Zhou Xianying knew that this was prepared by Yang Chun for Gong Sunling, so she wouldn't be so stupid to go out and explore with spiritual awareness, but she pushed it to Gong Sunling. Seeing that everyone wanted to know this answer, Gong Sunling also knew that the women would not do it. She was afraid that everyone would wait for a long time, so she hurriedly went out to do it, and soon returned to everyone. It has a radius of more than 3 million miles. When Gong Sunling said this answer, she still couldn't believe it. Such a large space, almost equivalent to a small half of the spiritual world. Was this something that could be refined by human beings? The cave house space collected in the past, the mortal world's blue vault mountain cave house, was only tens of thousands of miles, and it was already the core cave house of Chunyang Palace. Later on, the Langyuel was about the same size. It wasn't until they reached the spirit realm that they came into contact with cave abodes with a radius of more than 50,000 kilometers. Three River Alliance, Holocaust Sect, and Thousand Beast Sect's core cave abodes were more than 100,000 miles in radius, which was considered a rare big cave abode. Even the cave abode left behind by the South Pole, Immortal Wang's White Crane, was only SOSO. Most of the cultivators' cave residences were usually less than 1,000 miles in size. Strictly speaking, even Yang Chen's Five Elements Dragon Palace was at this level. It was just that its spirit veins were filled to the brim and would never dry up. Ordinary cave dwellings were usually divided according to the diameter they covered. The smallest might be a courtyard, which could barely be considered a cave dwelling of about a mile. Then, there were cave dwellings of 10 miles, 100 miles, 1,000 miles, and 10,000 miles. At the level of 10,000 kilometers, it was already a large cave abode. The 100,000 li was a sect, level super cave abode. But what about this one with a radius of more than 3 million miles? Super huge cave dwelling? The mountain river geographical map had been refined and integrated with the previous large and small cave abodes. Now, there were no experts in the spirit realm that could destroy it. What would happen if he were to fuse with this gigantic cave dwelling? Without Yang Chen's reminder, the women had already begun to look forward to it. Gong Sunling was already surprised and didn't know what to say. She didn't care about being reserved and directly threw herself into Yang Chen's arms, hugging her husband tightly. She just hugged him tightly and revealed her true feelings, but she couldn't say anything. This action was also teased by the other women. Even though they were an old couple, Gong Sunling was so shy that she didn't dare to raise her head. Everyone boarded the mysterious Heaven Nether Sea Shuttle. Yang Chen directly opened up the mysterious Heaven Nether Sea Shuttle's field of vision so that everyone could see the scene inside. Then, he used the fastest speed to tour the huge cave abode. Not to mention that the cave abode was super huge. It seemed to be rich in all kinds of resources. In his previous life, this cave abode was comparable to the Dragon Palace. The reason why it had such a reputation, in addition to its large size, was because of its rich resources. Now, he couldn't see anything from a cursory glance, but after refining and integrating it, he would know what kind of treasure it was inside. As long as there were materials that could be counted in the spirit realm, except for a few extremely rare things, such as underworld jade, this huge cave abode had mineral veins. Just this alone was enough to let all the cultivators in the Chunyang Palace come in. Everyone did nothing but dig, and it wouldn't be empty even after tens of thousands of years. This was not counting the spirit veins inside. Since Yang Chen started the mysterious Heaven Nether Sea Shuttle, within a radius of less than 10,000 miles, he had found 3 Heaven Immortal Spirit Veins, dozens of Earth Immortal Spirit Veins, and thousands of Human Immortal Spirit Veins. With a radius of 3 million miles, one could imagine how many spirit veins there were inside. In his field of vision, there was a lush forest and grassland on the ground. Without using divine sense to explore, he could see all kinds of plants and various animals hidden in them with the naked eye. The deeper he went, the more he could see spiritual beasts. Needless to say, this place was the same as the Blue Vault Mountain Cave abode. There must be various levels of demons inside. After seeing so much, everyone was already sighing. The 4 essentials of cultivation were Dharma, Earth, companionship, and wealth. This was a treasure land for cultivation. No matter which sect it was in, it would be the core cave abode of the sect's core cave abode. After refining this, I believe that the requirements that Brother Li Cheng mentioned can be met, right? Yang Chun asked with a smile, as if he was saying it to himself, but also as if he was answering someone. Absolutely. Although Gong Sunling didn't know how high brotherly Cheng's requirements were, she was also convinced of it. Even if the mountain river geographical map had not been refined and integrated before, just refining this super cave abode alone was more than the sum of the past 2,000 years of effort by more than dozens of times. Further ahead, everyone found higher cultivation level nascent soul stage and even human immortal stage beasts. It was believed that if they went deeper, there must be a large number of stronger earth immortals, heaven immortals, and even Xian immortals. The only pity was that there was no heavenly tribulation in this cave abode. No matter how strong these beasts were, they were just pseudo-masters who had not crossed the tribulation. Speaking of which, the nature was very similar to the nature of the natives of the spiritual world. It could be said that this was the world of the demon race's natives. Good place. Yang Chun sighed. I believe that Fatty Jing, Lao Gui, and Ho Yun will be willing to come here to establish a sect. All the women covered their mouths and snickered. Their husband had not fully controlled and collected this huge cave abode, but he had already thought so much. However, these cultivators who followed their husband were really lucky. Their husband did not forget to support them at such a time. Even to outsiders, Yang Chun was like this, let alone their family members. All the women snickered, but their hearts were full of happiness. Chapter 2052. The demons in the huge cave mansion were getting stronger and stronger. Except for a few flying demons that could catch up with the speed of the mysterious heavenly dark sea shuttle, the others could only watch the shadow of the shuttle and eat its dust. The women casually ordered their profound immortal demon guards to release some of their auras, and those flying demons were scared away. They didn't dare to chase after them anymore. The territory was so big that even with the speed of the mysterious heavenly dark sea shuttle, it would take almost half a year to go from one end to the other. Everyone was just curious to see what was inside, but they didn't intend to explore it completely. Anyway, in the future, after Gong Sunling refined it, she could go wherever she wanted. There was no need to waste time at this time. During this period, everyone also saw a lot of Xian immortal demons, all of whom were masters of their own area. They showed hostility towards the appearance of the mysterious heavenly dark sea shuttle, but Yang Chun and the others didn't mean to fight. They flew at high speed all the way and didn't cause much trouble. Okay, let's go out. Seeing that everyone was in a good mood, Yang Chun said, "A Ling, put the cave mansion in the mountain river geographical map and slowly refine it." In a flash, everyone appeared outside and watched with a smile as Gong Sunling put the huge cave mansion into the mountain river geographical map. Yang Chun was next to her and immediately noticed that the third primordial spirit had begun to move. Its goal was this huge cave mansion. Previously, he had bought those small cave mansions that were less than 1,000 miles away, and each of them only took a few hours. Moreover, it was thousands of them that began to refine and integrate at the same time. Now that the mountain river geographical map had Yang Chen's third primordial spirit as its weapon spirit, it seemed to have a backbone. Whether it was the refining efficiency or the quality, it had greatly improved. In the past, when Gong Sunling controlled it, she could only gather the power of all the cultivators in the mountain river geographical map and refine it together. But after all, it was not direct control. Everyone had different attributes, and a large part of it could be considered to offset each other, so it was relatively less interesting. Now that the third primordial spirit was involved, because of the balanced attributes of the 5 elements, the power of those cultivators was immediately divided into different attributes. Every type of elemental energy was directly refined under the control of his third primordial soul, and the efficiency was countless times higher than before. If one were to look at the interior of the giant cave dwelling, one would find that starting from the very edge of the cave dwelling, it was melting at a speed visible to the naked eye. Every breath of time, the speed of melting was measured in units of 1 zhong, forming an extremely distinct thin line wherever it passed. However, the demon natives inside did not panic because no matter which direction they looked from, apart from the abnormality in that line, the surrounding scenery was the same. Even the distribution of spiritual power had not changed, and it had no effect on their lives. However, in Gong Sunling's perception, as soon as this giant cave abode entered the mountain river geographical map, all the originally refined physical space was moved by the third primordial spirit to the lowest level, which was a mortal world in the mountain river geographical map. Then, this huge cave abode became the second level, which was the ground of the spiritual realm. The combined space of the cave abode he had fused in the past was not as big as this one, so this distribution was reasonable. Everything was progressing in an orderly manner, and the only thing that needed to be consumed was time. At this speed, it would take at least 10 or 20 years to refine and integrate the 3 million miles. This was only the initial integration, and it would take a longer time to completely refine the resources and spiritual veins inside. Gong Sunling felt it the most. She could even feel that her life source magic weapon was changing every moment and becoming stronger. Because of the integration of the cave abode, it even caused her cultivation base to become a little restless. In the midst of joy, everyone once again embarked on the journey of playing and purchasing spatial magic weapons. In Yangchen's plan, there were still several large cave abodes that could at least be comparable to the Three River Alliance Holocaust sect and 10,000 Demon Sect's core cave abodes still waiting for their owners. He couldn't let these cave abodes be idle, right? Even if there was a giant cave abode, one of them was worth 10 or even 100, but there was no harm in integrating more cave abodes. It must be known that the ultimate goal of Yangchen to integrate these cave abodes was to refine the core of the demon continent and the two worlds at the exit of the monster beast space. The more prepared, the better. If you walk at night too much, you will always encounter ghosts. When Yangchen and his party arrived near the large cave abode that no one had yet discovered according to his plan, they were surprised to find that there were people blocking the way here. The Wind Cloud Palace is handling matters. Unrelated people, please leave. They were not in a hurry, so they took Gong Sunling's ship. Just as everyone was enjoying the beautiful scenery while flying slowly, they suddenly heard a loud shout, and then several figures appeared, each occupying a direction, faintly surrounding the ship. Because the demonic tribulation was brought forward by hundreds of years under the influence of Yangchen, the time of the demonic tribulation was also shortened by hundreds of years. There were also some other things that had changed, and the cave abode in front of them was one of them. The reason for this was that a berserk demon beast had accidentally attacked and flattened a small mountain peak in this mountainous area. The monster didn't find anything and left directly, but when the demonic tribulation ended, some cultivators passed by here and found a corner of the array exposed under the small mountain. Originally, when they were flying normally, they didn't find anything, and everything happened by chance. This cultivator was tired from flying and found a small piece of flat land, so he decided to cultivate here. So after landing, he released his cave abode, but he didn't expect that his cave abode would be affected and couldn't land. Out of curiosity, the young cultivator checked and found a palm-sized place that was repelled. After a closer inspection, he found a small corner of the array there. This kind of array was not something that the young cultivator could touch. He was smart enough not to do it himself, but to sell this information in exchange for a few suitable magic treasures and a pile of spirit stones. This array was thus exposed to the eyes of some sect. The array formation had been set up countless years ago in order to protect that cave. The one who bought the information was the Wind Cloud Palace. They immediately sent people to investigate and found that it was likely to be an ancient ruin. They immediately sent people to surround the area and began to secretly excavate. The people who blocked the way were the experts in charge of guarding the area. An ancient ruin would be very valuable, and they would not allow outsiders to interfere. The ship of Yangchen and the others was still thousands of miles away when it was stopped. My sect is handling some matters ahead. Please do us a favor. The second person who spoke was another person, and his tone was also very polite, but the meaning was the same. They were both asking Yangchen's group to leave. Chapter 2053. The other party spoke politely, so Yangchen and the others did not take it too far. In front of them was only 100,000-kilometer super cave dwelling. To Yangchun and the others, it was no longer a necessity. Everyone came out to have fun and relax, not to fight with each other and make enemies. Inconvenient. Yangchun held a cup of wine and stuck his head out to take a look, then waved his hand nonchalantly. Then we'll take a detour. Saying so, he put down his wine cup and cupped his hands towards the cultivator who spoke behind him. Sorry for the disturbance. Logically speaking, there was no great enmity between the two parties, and it was very likely that they did not know each other. If one party did not give way and the other party politely said that they would take a detour, then there should be no further developments. However, when Yangchun poked his head out, he let the other party see the figure of him and a maid who was serving him drinking. Yangchun's maids were carefully selected and trained by Lady Fanghua in the mortal realm before being sent to Yangchun's side. Every one of them was extremely beautiful, especially when they were by Yangchun's side. All of them wished they could show off their most beautiful and attractive side to win a smile from Yangchun. Even the act of pouring wine was filled with extreme temptation. You want to leave? Not so easy. Not waiting for the person who spoke later to speak, the cultivator who shouted first had already rushed to open his mouth. His gaze was fixed on the maidservant next to Yangchun, and he sneered, "How could there be such a coincidence? My wind cloud palace is handling some matters, and you just barge in. You will definitely not accept that you are spies, so we won't go too far. Please explain yourself to our palace master. If he agrees, then you can leave." The cultivator who spoke later didn't want to cause trouble, but when this guy opened his mouth and spoke in such a dignified manner, even bringing up the palace master of Wind Cloud Palace, he had nothing else to say. If he insisted on letting Yangchun and the others go, then he would not be giving face to his palace master. Although he was angry at this fellow for being too talkative, he had no choice but to bite the bullet and say, "That's right. Everyone has come at the wrong time. It's really suspicious. If you don't want to hurt our relationship, please explain yourself in front of the hall master." While speaking, he had already seen the little maid beside Yangchun, who was a little surprised, and he immediately understood. It was obvious that his junior brother had seen the other party's beautiful maidservant and had some thoughts, but he just had to use such a clumsy excuse. When Yangchun and the girls went out to play, the girls took turns to accompany Yangchun, one for each day, whoever had their turn. Everyone cherished the opportunity to be with their husband and would always think of ways to make him happy. Generally speaking, when one person was around, the other women would be very tactful and not come out to pester him. Therefore, all the women were cultivating in their own rooms in the ship's cabin. This fellow from the Wind Cloud Palace was also muddle-headed. When he saw that there were only 2 people with a little maid, his heart was filled with evil thoughts. He used his divine sense to check and found out that Yangchun was only a little earthly, immortal early-stage cultivator, so he didn't put Yangchun in his eyes. As for the maid who served Yangchun, she was just a maid. How could her cultivation be higher than her master? Even if he tried to check, the other party probably wouldn't be able to see through the maid's cultivation. The main reason was because Yangchun's cultivation was lower than the maid's. Although Yangchun didn't care, the maid was very mindful of this. Every time they were around Yangchun, they would suppress their cultivation so that they wouldn't overshadow their beloved. It was also the fault of Madame Fanghua and the maids to cultivate this brilliant and colorful spirit method that was too pure. It was one of the best cultivation methods of the demon sex, and it was also the most good at confusing people's hearts. If they have the intention to hide their own cultivation base, how could the average cultivator see through it? A few silhouettes slowly approached from afar and surrounded the ship. The ship wasn't as hidden as the mysterious Heaven Dark Sea shuttle, and there was also a warning array set up here, so it was very easy to find them. With so many people surrounding them, ordinary cultivators wouldn't be able to run even if they wanted to. The cultivators surrounding them were all experts at the peak of the earthly immortal stage, so it was more than enough to deal with a little earthly immortal early stage cultivator. Everyone knew about their companion's illness. Anyway, they were far away from the Emperor, and there weren't any other cultivators here. At most, they would just destroy the corpse and get rid of the evidence. Who would know what happened here? Are you sure? Yang Chun raised his wine cup again, and the little maid beside him naturally raised the jade pot and filled the cup. Yang Chun leisurely took a sip, then asked the guy who wanted them to stay. In response to Yang Chen's words, the little maid beside him directly released her aura. She was originally enjoying the world with her beloved, but someone actually didn't have eyes. How could the demon girl, who cultivated the thousand-color spiritual method, not see the lustful light in that guy's eyes? Daring to disturb her beloved was courting death. As soon as the aura of a heaven immortal expert was released, the surrounding people panicked. The people surrounding them didn't expect that the timid little maid who could only be held in one's arms was actually a terrifying heaven immortal expert, and she even pretended to be a weak woman. You, a dignified heaven immortal expert, are so servile to an earthly immortal junior. Isn't this a trap? It's a misunderstanding. This is a misunderstanding. The relatively polite cultivator immediately sensed that something was wrong and raised his hand and shouted. This time, his companion had kicked an iron plate. The other party had a heaven immortal expert, and with so many cultivators present, they probably wouldn't be able to deal with it. Although the experts of a sect nearby would be able to sense the aura of a heaven immortal expert, and they would also send reinforcements, weren't they the ones who would bear the brunt? It wasn't worth it to put themselves in danger because of a companion's dirty thoughts. Those who weren't directly related to this matter naturally thought so, but the guy who had such thoughts knew that he was finished. Regardless of whether the other party attacked or not, he wouldn't have it easy. Rather than that, he might as well provoke the other party to kill the others, and he might be able to survive by relying on the defensive artifact that he had just obtained. At that time, wouldn't he be able to say whatever he wanted? He could push the blame onto Yang Chun and say that they wanted to force their way in. Would the sect not believe him, and instead believe two outsiders? They really are spies. The guy who had such thoughts didn't wait for Yang Chun to speak, and immediately interrupted and shouted, "You guys came here in disguise. Are you looking down on my wind cloud palace?" As he shouted, he had already crushed the warning jade talisman. Actually, he didn't need to do this. The sect had already sensed that something was wrong here. But with this action, attacking the guards and releasing their aura, didn't this make Yang Chen's actions even more suspicious? Now, they just had to wait for Yang Chun and the other party to make a move, and their wishful thinking would be considered half successful. Chapter 2054. It's a misunderstanding. They were all cultivators of the same sect. At this moment, no one could guess what this guy was thinking. A few of them spoke up at the same time, saying that it was a misunderstanding. But this guy, who wanted to make things worse, would not allow these people to clear up the misunderstanding. Just as they spoke, he had already made his move. Chi! The sound of the flying sword slicing through the air was so ear-piercing that everyone wanted to tear this incompetent person into a million pieces. However, the reality in front of them no longer allowed them to think any further. They could only be bound together and attack together. How could anyone offend the dignity of a heaven immortal expert? This guy's words and actions had completely angered the heaven immortal expert. Not to mention the opponent, if they had such a cultivation, who wouldn't retaliate after being cursed and attacked by a junior. The guy from the Wind Cloud Palace was fast, but the little servant girl was even faster. Just as the flying sword flew close to Yang Chun, the little servant girl's figure had already appeared in front of the guy, who spoke rudely. Angry that he had ruined her and her beloved, the little servant girl was merciless. Sword light flashed, and the opponent's six-sun leader flew into the sky. While he was still in the air, he was grabbed by little Su Nu's slender hand and quickly returned to the ship. At this moment, the opponent's flying sword had just flown to Yang Chen's side. Yang Chun gently stretched out his hand, and the ownerless flying sword was easily grasped in his hand. He casually waited a few times, shook his head, and directly threw it to Xiao Tian for him to play with. Who dares to kill my Wind Cloud Palace disciple? The culprit had been beheaded, and Yang Chun did not seem to have any intention of pursuing the matter. The remaining Wind Cloud Palace disciples heaved a sigh of relief and were about to explain the misunderstanding to Yang Chun when they suddenly heard a shout from afar. Oh no! This misunderstanding could not be explained. While everyone was complaining in their hearts, They also heaved a sigh of relief. From the sound of the voice, it was a heaven immortal expert from the sect. If he rushed over, at least they would not be at a disadvantage. No matter how the negotiations went, they didn't have to worry about their lives for the time being. Yang Chun and the little maid didn't continue to fight. This kind of meaningless fight was the most boring. It was enough to get rid of the main culprit. There was no need to dwell on it. However, just because Yang Chun thought so, it didn't mean that everyone else thought so. There were many unreasonable people in the world, and the person in front of them happened to be one of them. Are you the one who killed people from the Wind Cloud Palace? There was more than one person rushing over, but the leader was a late Heaven Immortal expert, and there were a few early Heaven Immortal experts by his side, looking very majestic. When he saw the scene in front of him, he immediately shouted at the little handmaiden who was still holding a head in her hand. As soon as this person appeared, the few cultivators who had just stopped Yang Chun immediately bowed to the other party and said, "I have seen the elder." The other party ignored them and waved his hand directly. His eyes were still directed at the little maid. "It's me." With the head that she had just severed in her hand, the maidservant did not intend to deny it and admitted it directly. "It's good that you admit it." The other party was probably a big shot in the Wind Cloud Palace. His tone was full of command. "Put down the flying sword and surrender. I'll give you a chance to explain. Otherwise, I'll kill you." Yang Chun had also seen a lot of big figures. Which of the sect masters of the major sects was not polite when they saw Yang Chun? How could they be like this guy who was not satisfied with half a bottle of wine? He really thought that he could cover the sky with one hand. His heart suddenly felt very uncomfortable. "Don't you want to ask the people around you what happened?" Yang Chun asked with a frown. Although he asked, he was sighing in his heart. He didn't want to cause trouble, but there was someone who didn't want to get what he wanted. The disciples of the Wind Cloud Palace will be taken care of later. The elder waved his hand and stopped Yang Chun's next words. He said coldly, "But you killed the disciples of the Wind Cloud Palace. Whether it's a misunderstanding or not, you have to leave a life as compensation." As the elder spoke, the few Heaven Immortal experts that he had brought with him had surrounded the ship again. It seemed that they had already taken care of Yang Chun and the maidservant. "Is this your idea, or the idea of the Wind Cloud Palace?" Yang Chun was still not angry. He just asked calmly, "Is there any difference between my idea and the idea of the Wind Cloud Palace?" The elder sneered and replied disdainfully. At a time like this, instead of thinking about escaping or begging for mercy, they still asked such an indifferent question. They were simply two idiots. "There is a difference." Yang Chun sighed helplessly and said, "If it's your idea, then we'll find you alone. If it's the idea of the Wind Cloud Palace, then we'll have to find the entire Wind Cloud Palace. There's a big difference. No matter who you know from the Wind Cloud Palace, it can't erase your sin of killing the disciples of the Wind Cloud Palace." The elder didn't want to say anything more to Yang Chun. "If you know what's good for you, then surrender and leave a life as compensation. If you can explain it, the remaining one can live. Otherwise, don't blame us for bullying you with our numbers." In the elder's mind, the maidservant was obviously from the demon sect. Needless to say, she must have seduced a junior from the Tao sect to have some fun. She definitely wouldn't protect him with her life. He didn't say who would be left alive. Naturally, he was waiting for the little maid to expose the nature of the witch and abandon Yang Chun. He also let the younger generation, who seemed to be confident, know the dangers of the spiritual world. However, what he didn't expect was that his words didn't seem to have any effect at all. The scene that he was looking forward to didn't appear. This was really a bit confusing. "Is there a lot of people?" Yang Chun looked around and curled his lips helplessly again. "It doesn't look like there are a lot of people." Following Yang Chun's words, 9 maidservants wearing different colored clothes gracefully walked out of the cabin of the ship. All of them were fairy immortals. The 9 maidservants didn't hide their realms. They just walked out quietly and then gently put away the dishes on the table in front of Yang Chun. The last 2 carried the jade table away as if they came out to clean up the leftovers from Yang Chun's feast. Including the elder himself, there were only 6 fairy immortals in total. They thought that they had already defeated Yang Chun and Yang Chun. They didn't expect that Yang Chun still had such a card up his sleeve. It would be a joke to say that there were more people. Send a warning. It seems that the Wind Cloud Palace has been quiet for too long. Many people have become complacent. The elder didn't get angry, but laughed instead. After laughing for a while, he said, "None of you can leave today." Sigh. Wind Cloud Palace. Yang Chun sighed helplessly. He looked at the elder's angry face and shook his head. Why bother? What a pity. Chapter 2055. This area, spanning a radius of several thousand kilometers, contained an ancient ruin. This was information that the Wind Cloud Palace had obtained from a junior cultivator after spending a huge sum of money. In order to keep it a secret, the Wind Cloud Palace Hall Master had personally sent a core elder to kill that cultivator. He did not want anyone to know about the secret of this area. The poor cultivator had thought that he would be able to make a fortune with this accidental discovery. He did not expect to end up like this. In fact, the ancient ruins were spread out over a radius of 100 miles at most. But to be on the safe side, the Wind Cloud Palace Hall Master had mobilized the entire sect's power to seal off the entire area, just for this one gamble. Everyone knew that if there was a protective formation, there would definitely be an inheritance. There must be many things in this ancient ruins that other sects would go crazy over. The Wind Cloud Palace was a second-rate sect. Its development over the years had not been very smooth, especially after the Devil Calamity. When the Devil Calamity broke out, the Wind Cloud Palace had lost a large number of disciples. Coupled with their bad luck, the sect was too far away from the Sunset Cliff. They did not even have the chance to be protected by Chunyang Palace. Fortunately, the sect had a few experts with foresight. They brought most of the cultivators into their cave mansions and finally made it to a safe place before the demonic beasts filled the area. However, the sect's territory had been completely destroyed. This ancient ruins was the key to the Wind Cloud Palace's rise again. A safe territory with an unknown amount of inheritance. If the resources inside were sufficient, it would be enough to satisfy the development of a super sect, let alone a small Wind Cloud Palace. Because of this, the entire Wind Cloud Palace had high expectations for this ancient ruins. They would not allow anyone to disrupt their excavation work. This was also one of the reasons why the elder dared to be so unyielding. The entire formation was about to take shape under the hard work of the Wind Cloud Palace disciples. They were about to see the door to the ancient ruins. Just as everyone was happily looking forward to it, a warning suddenly came. Immediately, the Wind Cloud Palace Hall Master and the others were furious. No matter who they are, no matter what their status is, kill them all. The warning said that there were more than 10 cultivators, including a Heaven Immortal expert. Without hesitation, the Wind Cloud Palace Hall Master gave the order to kill. Although the Wind Cloud Palace was only a second-rate sect, it was only because of the limited number of disciples that they could recruit. But there was no lack of true experts. Not to mention the others. There were over 20 mysterious Immortal Realm experts, and it was even more than the experts of some first-rate sect. These experts were the confidence of the Wind Cloud Palace. At this critical moment, they could not afford to make any mistakes. Someone had barged in and triggered the alarm. That meant that they had made an enemy out of the entire Wind Cloud Palace. They were just a few cultivators. So what if they were killed? As long as he didn't let any of them go, he would even dare to kill people from the Black Heaven sect. The wrong time, the wrong place, and the wrong motive led to a wrong decision and an irreconcilable war. The ancient ruins was a major event, so the Wind and Cloud Palace Lord had to personally oversee it. Killing someone was a small matter, so he could just send a Hall Master to lead the experts. Just in case, they sent 2 Xian Immortal experts this time, which was enough. It wouldn't take long for 2 Xian Immortal experts to reach a distance of less than 3,000 miles. They rushed very quickly, not because they were worried that something would happen to their own disciples, but because they were afraid that if they were too slow, there would be nothing left for them to do by the time they arrived. Every injustice has its perpetrator. Every debt has its debtor. You want to kill me, so I will accept this karma. When there was still some time left, the 2 Xian Immortal experts heard Yijin's deep voice as if he was chanting something. Hearing the voice, The two of them didn't dare to be negligent and quickly rushed over with tens of experts from the sect. There must have been a fight in front, otherwise he wouldn't be saying such words. Rushing quickly and slowly, when the experts of the Wind Cloud Palace arrived at the location where the alarm was triggered, they saw a scene that made their eyes almost pop out of their sockets. A group of women in colorful robes were leisurely serving a man on a flying ship magic treasure. Around the ship, there were more than 10 corpses of Wind Cloud Palace disciples. The blood that covered the ground was like a side dish for the man to go with his wine. If this could be tolerated, what could not be tolerated? The cultivators that rushed over were not cowardly cultivators. What else could they say in this situation? Attack. Because there were two Xian Immortal experts, the movement was much bigger. What made the two Xian Immortal experts surprised was that these women in colorful clothes obviously used a very special formation. 28 people surrounded all the experts in the formation. Relying on the formation, they killed those cultivators who exposed their weaknesses one by one. The man didn't make a move at all. He had been sitting at the bow of the ship, holding a small jade cup and drinking. He seemed to have turned a blind eye to the scene in front of him. This was not the most infuriating thing. The most infuriating thing was that there were two women in colorful clothes beside the man. They didn't even look over here. One was pouring wine for the man, and the other was serving food. It was as if the battle here was not worth watching at all. Such an intense battle was not even comparable to them pouring wine for the man. Where did these experts come from? The 30 women in colorful clothes seemed to have similar cultivation. All of them were at the early stage of Heaven Immortal. Each and every one of them was either charming or flirtatious, but their attacks were extremely ruthless. In just a few moves, the Earth Immortal disciples that the two Xian Immortal experts brought along were all killed. The opponents were Heaven Immortal experts, so it was not surprising that they could kill Earth Immortal disciples. However, the remaining Heaven Immortal experts and two Xian Immortal experts were actually unable to do anything to 28 early-stage Heaven Immortal women. It was truly unbelievable. The opponent's formation is powerful. Break the formation with a deadly attack. One of the Xian Immortal experts had already noticed that the situation was not right. If this continued, the experts that were trapped in the formation would be tortured to death. He couldn't care about anything else and shouted at the other Xian Immortal expert. They were all companions that had worked together for many years. The moment one spoke, the other party knew what he meant. The two of them attacked the two women in colorful clothes that were closest to them at the same time. At the same time, a few formation flags suddenly appeared beside them. Just as the two women received the attack, the formation flags suddenly exploded. Boom, boom, boom. After the violent explosion, the two women in colorful clothes were indeed unable to withstand the trump card attacks of the Xian Immortal experts. Both of them spat out blood, and it was obvious that they were heavily injured. It was a great opportunity. Just as the two Xian Immortal experts were about to follow up with another attack, the two heavily injured women suddenly retreated from the battle. Although they didn't kill them, the formation had lost two people and immediately became incomplete. It could be said that the attacks of the two people were effective. However, just as this thought arose, the two women in colorful clothes who were serving the penetrated man rushed forward and filled the gap between the two women. The formation that had just cracked a little immediately recovered to its original state. Chapter 2056. In the 28 constellation splitting sky array, only two Xian Immortal experts with injuries were left. The dozen Heaven Immortal experts had already been killed. The two who survived were only able to react in time due to their high cultivation base. That was how they managed to escape with their lives. However, they were still injured. The two women who had retreated from the battle were still in the air when a long vine suddenly appeared and wrapped around them, pulling them back to the man's side. At the same time the formation was completed, the man on the other side had already put two pills into the two women's mouths. As soon as the pills entered their mouths, the two women's complexions immediately became much better. Thump, thump, thump. A series of heavy heartbeats rang out, causing the cultivators from Wind Cloud Palace to suddenly sense danger. Their hearts seemed to be beating along with the music, and it was beating more and more violently. This was something that had never happened before. Those who were still alive saw a different scene. More than half of their companions suddenly stopped in their tracks, and then their bodies exploded as if there were bombs buried in them. Blood, flesh, and bone fragments filled the sky, causing the area to rain blood. The idea was good, but the reality was cruel. When another Xian immortal elder of the Wind Cloud Palace arrived with over 100 experts, he saw 2 Xian immortal experts being beheaded by 2 incomparably beautiful women. They were so far away that even if they wanted to save him, they wouldn't be able to. Send a signal. Tell them that the enemies are troublesome and ask them to send more experts over. Seeing that the situation couldn't be improved, the 2 Xian immortal experts didn't care about their pride and immediately asked one of them to send a warning to the sect. This scene caused the 2 mysterious immortal realm experts to almost spit out a mouthful of blood. They'd painstakingly refined an explosive formation with great difficulty, yet in the end, it only heavily injured 2 of them. Moreover, the formation was immediately repaired. Where did this rainbow-clothed woman come from? How could they cooperate so well? When the 2 of them sent the signal, the cabin door of the ship opened, and an even more enchanting beauty walked out. She swayed her incomparably beautiful waist as she arrived behind Yang Chun. She placed her slender hands on Yang Chen's shoulders and slowly massaged them. Kill. There were no more words, only this undisguised word kill. This was a life and death enmity. Other than fighting to the death, there was no other way to resolve it. If they wanted to end it, it could only end with one side being completely annihilated. Some smart people immediately thought of the many terrifying forces behind Yang Chun and immediately felt that something was wrong. They immediately shouted, "Master Yang, please stop. There must be some misunderstanding." Granny Tianqin was married to Yang Chun, so there was no need to ask. The woman sitting at the bow must be the alchemy master Yang Chun. His cultivation was about the same as well, so he should be the real person. The 2 of them had no choice but to take care of their injured companions. Because of this, they were even more strained. They were tired of dealing with the attacks that were coming at them from all directions. Even if they wanted to counterattack, they were a little powerless. Only the 2 of them were left, and they could only defend with their backs against each other. One of them had already sent out the highest level of warning. As long as they could hold on for a period of time, the reinforcements from the Wind Cloud Palace would arrive. At that time, he would skin these lowly servants alive to vent the hatred in his heart. The 2 Xian immortal experts felt a headache coming on. This strange formation looked upright, not at all as strange as the devil sex, but the effects were too good. The heaven immortal experts they brought with them were also starting to get injured one after another. If this continued, those who were injured would also die. Although she was scolding the women, in the ears of the Wind Cloud Palace experts in the formation, it was like the best heavenly music, causing them to be in a daze and not know what to do. When the fatal attacks were about to hit them, they realized that they had actually been distracted during the battle. Granny Tianqin. At this time, someone finally remembered the woman's identity from the effects of the woman's zither playing and cried out involuntarily. No one from the Wind Cloud Palace was in the mood to appreciate what she was playing. They only wanted to kill. Especially Yang Chun. He was the main culprit. They must tear him into pieces to dispel the hatred of their companions being killed in the sect. The dozen or so cultivators that were rushing up suddenly heard the sound of a zither. Strangely enough, this zither sound seemed to have a power that went straight into their lungs, causing their internal organs to vibrate along with the sound of the zither. It was extremely comfortable. It's always like this. When some people want a reason, there are always others who want to kill. Yang Chen looked at this scene and could only shake his head, sighing again. Wind Cloud Palace, what a pity. The 2 with the highest cultivation had already spent a lot of effort to refine an explosive formation, but they did not have any more. No matter how they attacked, the rainbow-robed woman could always rely on the number of people and the tacit coordination of the formation to block it. Although she could not do anything to the 2 of them for the time being, it was not a problem to trap them. Clang! A heavy sound of the zither seemed to transform into invisible swords that directly rushed into the bodies of the Wind Cloud Palace people. The formation that Big Brother taught you is indeed powerful. While massaging Yang Chen's shoulder, the beautiful woman said, "It can be used during cultivation and during battle. But if you meet someone with a high cultivation, it can only protect yourself, but not enough to attack." Unfortunately, there were not many who understood, and there were many who were driven mad by the blood rain. Faced with the tragic death of their companions, except for a few, the rest could not care about anything else. They wiped the blood off their faces and rushed towards Yang Chen's family without any hesitation. At the bow of the ship, a woman playing the zither had appeared out of nowhere. The woman looked very gentle and beautiful. Her movements while playing the zither were also very graceful. Beside the zither, there was also a pot of good incense. It had a sweet smell and a faint smoke lingering around, making the woman look like an immortal. At least half of them suddenly felt a pain in their chest, as if their hearts had suddenly exploded. Not only their hearts, but their organs, livers, spleens, lungs, and kidneys all seemed to feel the same. Then their entire body was in intense pain, and they could no longer feel anything. Over 100 experts spread out and rushed towards the group of women. Similarly, dozens of them rushed towards the ship. Everyone could see that the man was the leader, and these women were simply listening to his commands. After explaining to Yang Chen, the beautiful woman's expression changed slightly. She shouted to the women, "We didn't put in the effort normally. Now you're suffering." One side fought quickly, while the other side healed quickly. There was simply no way for them to survive. What made people want to vomit blood was that in just a short while, the two women who had just vomited blood seemed to be fine. They picked up their wine pots and chopsticks and continued what the two women were doing. Be careful of the zither sound. Someone sensed that something was wrong and knew that this was a type of sound attack. Unfortunately, this warning was a little too late. Chapter 2057. Zhou Xianying's Heavenly Phoenix Zither was a combination of several dragon race materials. Most importantly, it was personally refined by Big Brother Li Cheng, so it was much stronger than the previous Heavenly Phoenix Zither. Moreover, Zhou Xianying was only at the peak of the Earth Immortal stage in the past, so she couldn't use many of her melodies. Now that Zhou Xianying was a grade 6 Heaven Immortal expert, and her spiritual sense had entered the Golden Immortal stage, she was like a tiger that had grown wings when she controlled the Heavenly Phoenix Zither. Cultivators with similar cultivation as Zhou Xianying, without the abnormal spiritual sense cultivation of Yang Chen's family, wouldn't be able to last more than 10 minutes under Zhou Xianying's murderous melody. Moreover, under the attack of the zither, there was also the 28 constellation sky splitting formation. Those cultivators who didn't die under the first round of zither music didn't last long under the pincer attack of the formation and zither music. Especially those who had been stimulated by slaughter and blood, they were the best targets for the zither music. In a short while, there were only a few Xian Immortal experts left in the Wind Cloud Palace. Xian Immortal experts were indeed Xian Immortal experts. Even under the siege of the murderous melody and 28 constellation sky splitting formation, they could still maintain their normal attacks. This time, there were more people, so it wasn't as easy to deal with as the previous two. If that was the case, perhaps these Xian Immortal experts could hold on until the next batch of reinforcements arrived. Unfortunately, there were no ifs in this world. In addition to Madame Fanghua, who joined the battle group, there was also a master that others could not think of, Old Hai. Elder Hai didn't show himself, but his illusion array was everywhere. As a member of the demon race who had been sealed for tens of thousands of years, Old Hai had long lost his sense of self. He didn't have the concept of fairness in a battle, whether it was a conspiracy or an overt plot. Killing his enemies had already become his instinct, and he was constantly plotting against those Xian Immortal experts. The sound of the zither, the sky cracking array, and the illusion array of Old Hai, this was already a three-pronged attack. Don't forget that the Myriad Beauty's spirit method itself was an extremely brilliant illusion cultivation method. The 28 maids and Madame Fanghua launched it at the same time. The 4 attacks were launched together. It was simply impossible to guard against. A slight distraction affected a Xian Immortal expert from the Wind Cloud Palace, causing him to stagger and slow down. The scene of his beloved disciple's tragic death suddenly appeared before his eyes. Immediately, he felt a rush of anger attack his heart, and his entire person went crazy. Originally, everyone had to cooperate with each other to maintain a balance. However, one person suddenly went berserk, crazily attacking the women without any regard for anything else. The Wind Cloud Palace's formation was instantly thrown into chaos. Stabilize the formation. An expert who seemed to be in charge immediately shouted, stopping several experts who wanted to rescue their companions. No matter what, this was where most of the people from the Wind Cloud Palace were. As long as they could hold on for a little longer, reinforcements would soon arrive. It was not worth taking the risk for a crazy comrade. By the time the experts regained their footing and regained their balance, there were already many wounds on the crazed expert's body. Don't waste things. It was unknown when another girl had appeared by Yang Chen's side. She was the youngest, Sun Qingxue. The few people in front of them were Xian Immortal experts. Although the Jade Dragon entangling, blood-devouring demon vine had already devoured the blood of a golden immortal, the more blood the better. After all, even a mosquito's leg was meat. Silently, thin vines appeared under the feet of the people in the battle, wriggling like several long snakes. Wherever they went, all the blood quickly disappeared without a trace. Which of the people in the battle wasn't fully focused, not daring to be distracted? Of course, the appearance of these vines couldn't be hidden from the probing of their divine sense. However, in an intense battle, knowing that something had appeared was one thing, and being able to defend against it was another. The Xian Immortal expert, who was covered in blood, was simply the biggest temptation of the blood-devouring demon vine. When it wandered nearby, it suddenly exploded, and like a giant python, it coiled towards the expert. The injured Xian Immortal expert's reaction wasn't slow either. In the blink of an eye, the flying sword slashed 3 times, and each slash landed on the vines. Under normal circumstances, these vines were definitely not as sharp as the flying sword and would definitely be cut into several pieces. However, these were not ordinary vines, but the Jade Dragon entangling, blood-devouring demon vine. Except for the slightly weaker Jade vine, the dragon entangling grass, the blood-devouring demon vine, and the blood-devouring demon vine were not ordinary. The blood-devouring demon vine had already devoured the blood of a golden immortal dragon, and it was already unreasonably strong. The blood-devouring demon vine itself was the golden immortal realm left by Yang Lan last time. Needless to say, the dragon entangling grass, in addition to entangling the golden immortal Ao Lan, was also a powerful product that had lived for tens of thousands of years. None of the vines had the special sharpness of Yang Chen's immortal beheading saber, or Yang Chen's abnormal strength, so they couldn't cause any harm to it. Not to mention the blood-devouring demon vine formed by the combination of the 4 vines. When the flying sword slashed on it, it only made a few clanking sounds of metal collision, and there was no more. The flying sword did not play any role in delaying the vines. Instead, the flying sword was rolled up by the vines. The Xian Immortal expert was just stunned. In addition to the pain of the injury on his body, his figure was a little slow, and he was surrounded by the blood-devouring demon vine. In the blink of an eye, he became a big green cocoon with a hint of blood. Being wrapped by the blood-devouring demon vine, it was estimated that only an expert like Ao Lan could break free. The ordinary Xian Immortal expert was doomed. Even the scream in the cocoon only made half a sound before there was no more sound. The tragic death of their companion made the remaining experts even more panicked. The highest level of warning had been sent 3 times in a row, but now the reinforcements had not arrived yet. If it was just now, the 2 sides could still maintain a balance, but now there were so many blood-devouring demon vines on the ground. This time, the balance of victory and defeat had firmly fallen to Yang Chen's side. Misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. A big misunderstanding. At this time, the leading expert no longer cared about his face. He frantically shouted at the crowd that it was a misunderstanding. He no longer had the arrogance of not giving anyone a chance to explain at the beginning. You were the one who shouted to kill just now, and now you are also the one who shouted that it was a misunderstanding. The actions of the women did not stop at all. They were still attacking crazily. The one who spoke was Yangchun. I don't like people like you who see the wind and set the helm. If you say to kill, then kill. If you say to stop because it is a misunderstanding, then I am too easy to talk to. After drinking a cup of Jade Dragon wine from the wine cup that Sun Qingxue handed to his mouth, Yangchun shook his head. Even if there is a misunderstanding, it should be with the people from your Wind Cloud Palace. You are the result of that misunderstanding. Chapter 2058. Yangchen's few words had almost announced the death penalty of the other party. These people from Wind Cloud Palace were already in despair, but Xian Immortal experts were still Xian Immortal experts. They still had their dignity. Since they couldn't lower their heads, they could only fight with their lives on the line. When Xian Immortal experts went berserk, it would definitely be a headache. These guys knew that they were going to die, so they made up their minds to drag a few down with them. Each of them targeted one of the maids in the sky, splitting formation. Disregarding the other attacks, they didn't let go, only focused on killing one of them. This was putting themselves in a dead end. They believed that if Yangchun didn't want to see one or two of his Heaven Immortal maids die, they might still have a chance to live. However, just as they launched their crazy attacks, their vision blurred and the figures of the maids disappeared. Not only that, but his companions who were not far away from him were nowhere to be seen. All the attacks and formations had disappeared without a trace in an instant. Although the land in front of them was very familiar, there were no signs of battle. The few of them were shocked. What kind of brilliant array was this? These are all Xian Immortal experts. We can't let them die in vain. Just as the Xian Immortal experts of Wind Cloud Palace were still bewildered, Gong Suinling's figure appeared beside Yangchun, smiling sweetly at Yangchun. With Gong Suinling's cultivation, it was still beyond her ability to use the mountain river geographical map to take the initiative to collect Xian Immortal experts, even with Yangchen's third primordial spirit as the artifact spirit. However, she couldn't take the initiative, but she could leave the door wide open for others to enter. Such a long battle was enough for Gong Sunling to slowly unfold the mountain river geographical map, and then transform it into a scene that was exactly the same as the surroundings. While the maids were fighting, they were slowly bringing their opponents into the mountain river geographical map. An additional Xian Immortal expert in the mountain river geographical map was an additional force. This kind of opportunity couldn't be easily missed. Everyone cleaned up the battlefield, but in fact, they were collecting all the corpses into the mountain river geographical map. These were resources that couldn't be wasted. Then, he slowly moved forward, waiting for the next batch of Wind Cloud Palace's reinforcements to arrive. Why haven't the people from Wind Cloud Palace arrived yet? After a while, Yangchun and the others had already advanced a few hundred miles, but not a single figure appeared. Sun Qingxue, who had been waiting impatiently, immediately pouted. It would be weird if they dare to come. On the other side, Shi Wushuang laughed. Who asked you to kill so ruthlessly at the start? There are already about 10 Xian Immortal experts. How many experts does the Wind Cloud Palace have that would dare to be killed in front of you? What Shi Wushuang said was exactly what Temple Master Fengyan was thinking. Originally, he thought that it was just a small conflict. There were several Xian Immortal experts in this group of experts, so no matter how big or small the conflict was, it should be resolved. However, the group of 7 to 8 Xian Immortal experts actually sent out the highest level of warning. What this meant, Hall Master Fengyan was clearer than anyone else. The other party was not a match for them. No matter how many people they sent, they would just be sending themselves to their deaths. Currently, he was at a critical juncture in breaking the ancient ruins array, and it seemed like he would be able to break through it soon. Suddenly, someone came in with great fanfare. Needless to say, it must be a cultivator who had received the news from somewhere and wanted to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. Based on the current situation, if they couldn't break through this array and enter the ancient ruins in a short time, Wind Cloud Palace could only retreat and put in so much effort for nothing. Otherwise, they could only fight to the death with the intruders, and the result might be complete annihilation. If 10 Xian Immortal experts were not a match for them, then could the remaining people be defeated? Just as Hall Master Feng Yun was panicking and didn't know what to do, he suddenly heard a cheer. "The array is broken! The array is broken!" Hearing this voice, Hall Master Feng Yun's heart instantly relaxed, and he laughed. "The heavens are really helping me." Saying this, he didn't delay and waved his hand, ordering all Wind Cloud Palace disciples immediately enter the ruins. Saying this, he took the lead and rushed to the location of the broken array, leading the way into the ruins. Indeed, as Hall Master Feng Yun expected, the ruins was a huge cave dwelling. Filled with spiritual energy, it was definitely a cultivation treasure land. Most importantly, when he entered, he found that there was an array that was still operating, and not far away from it was an array disk that seemed to be the array's eye. "The heavens are not the end, Wind Cloud Palace," Hall Master Feng Yun exclaimed in his heart, quickly rushed up, and took the array disk in his hand. Using his divine sense, he immediately understood the function of the array disk. With a thought, a large hole appeared in the array, allowing the people of Wind Cloud Palace to enter. Everyone knew that there was a warning, so they moved quickly, and in a short while, they all entered the array. Under Hall Master Feng Yun's control, the array quickly recovered. This time, no matter how powerful the other party was, they wouldn't be able to rush in a short time. The higher-ups of Wind Cloud Palace collectively heaved a sigh of relief. The situation just now was too thrilling. Wind Cloud Palace almost had a fight to the death with an unknown expert. Now it was all good, they were safe. When Yang Chun and the others walked over, they didn't see a single Wind Cloud Palace disciple. But very soon, they saw the excavated array, and the hole that the Wind Cloud Palace disciple had forcefully broken. What a waste! Yang Chun and Gong Sunling shook their heads at the same time. The reason that the cave dwelling was still full of spiritual power was obviously due to this array. The people of Wind Cloud Palace actually used such a violent method to break it, it was really a waste. Looking at the current situation, everyone understood that the people of Wind Cloud Palace must have retreated into the cave dwelling. It had to be said that Hall Master Feng Yun was an ambitious person. Knowing that he couldn't win, he immediately cut his losses and gave up on those experts, but saved the lives of the majority of Wind Cloud Palace disciples. Under normal circumstances, Hall Master Feng Yun could be considered a person who could do great things. He would leave behind some living forces to make a comeback. Unfortunately, this time, he encountered Yang Chun and his family. Everyone knew what Yang Chun and his family's trip was for. It was to collect a few large cave dwellings, and buy some small cave dwellings along the way to supplement the geographical map. The other party had all entered this large cave dwelling. What did this mean? For Yang Chun and his family, this was clearly taking the initiative to become a turtle in a jar. If they had scattered and escaped, Yang Chun and the others definitely wouldn't have been able to chase and destroy them one by one, but they had taken the initiative to hide in this cave dwelling, so they couldn't blame Yang Chun for being impolite. As long as they collected this cave dwelling from the outside and sent it to the geographical map, then the people of Wind Cloud Palace inside would directly become prisoners. They had never seen such a convenient deal. Chapter 2059. Yang Chen had heard of the array outside. Or to be precise, it was told to him by the cultivator who set up the array, because the entire cave abode was left behind by him. A certain immortal in the Immortal beheading platform revealed this secret before his death, just because he didn't want the cave abode that he had painstakingly refined to be buried. Generally speaking, those who refined spatial magic treasures were array cultivators. Through a unique spatial array, it was slowly filled and then integrated with some real mountains and rivers, turning it into a cave abode. As one's refining skills deepened, the cave abode would become bigger and bigger. A large cave abode, a 100,000 miles, had at least taken thousands of years of hard work by the refiner. No one wanted to never have a chance to make something like this. If the array was broken by force, it was the effect that the Wind Cloud Palace had achieved. However, Yang Chun easily put away the entire array according to the method taught by the person who set up the array. Not only that, but the array was actually one with the cave abode. When he put away the array, he also put away the cave abode at the same time. The people of the Wind Cloud Palace would never have thought that they would be very safe in the ancient ruins, but at this moment, they had already become Gong Suanling's captives. They just hadn't realized it yet. Although the Mountain River geographical map was still refining the super large cave abode, it did not prevent the third primordial soul from easily repairing the outer array and then easily setting it up in the Mountain River geographical map. This way, even if the people of the Wind Cloud Palace came out, they would directly enter the Mountain River geographical map instead of the spiritual realm. Since they had already entered the Mountain River geographical map, it was not up to them to come out again. Whether it was the Wind Cloud Palace or the Big Cave Abode, it was only a matter of time before they were controlled by Gong Sunling. Husband, sometimes you are too easy to talk to. Lady Fanghua watched Yang Chun put away everything, then said with a slight complaint. Lady Fanghua was from the demon sect, and she had always respected the creed of the law of the jungle. When Yang Chun first encountered the people from the Wind Cloud Palace, he immediately took a detour and gave up without saying a word. This was very inconsistent with Lady Fenghua's way of doing things. Because of the dedication of Lady Fanghua and the maidservants, Gao Yu had already let Yang Chun take Lady Fanghua as a concubine. At the same time, she also turned the maidservants into concubines. Their status was slightly improved, and they were allowed to call Yang Chun husband. Because of this small change, Lady Fanghua and the maidservants were so happy that they were even happier than if they had won the lottery. This showed how much they cared for her. Sometimes, Gao Yu also felt touched, but her husband couldn't easily give it to others. Allowing them to share a little was already his limit. But in the end, this cave still became ours, didn't it? Yang Chun smiled and said to Lady Fanghua, "But we have never bullied the weak, have we? I hate you Dao sect pedants the most. You have to pay attention to a good reason when you attack. Hypocrites." Lady Fanghua couldn't refute this result. She could only pout and complain. Then, she obediently nestled in her husband's arms and enjoyed the warmth of his chest. She was barefoot, and her white and tender toes playfully teased Yang Chen's calf. Lady Fanghua also only complained a little. No matter what Yang Chen did, it didn't stop her from being obsessed with her husband. Her husband was the sky, the earth, and everything. The Wind Cloud Palace disappeared without trace. There was no place for the Wind Cloud Palace in the spiritual realm anymore. Until many years later, the disappearance of the Wind Cloud Palace was still a mystery. Yang Chun and his family slowly rushed to the next marketplace. It was still the same old way. They visited the shops and bought anything they were interested in. Of course, all the space-type magic treasures were swept away. The women went shopping, and Yang Chun was treated as a distinguished guest by a medium-sized shop. He was respectfully invited to wait on him in the VIP hall. As long as Yang Chun showed a little interest in the products of the shop, they would immediately and respectfully send them to him. This was the privilege of a big buyer. Of course, it was also because of Yang Chen's identity. Who in the spiritual realm didn't want Master Yang's elixirs? Master Yang's elixirs were all auctioned at Wanbao Tower, and there was never a fixed price. After the devil tribulation, the price of Master Yang's elixirs was even higher, and there was no market for them. I heard that Master Yang was cheated by the profiteer of Shabby Pavilion a month ago. He bought some cave magic treasures at a price several times higher. The shopkeeper was very secretive and even seemed to be trying to curry favor with him. This has really destroyed the market of our shop and caused the great master to lose a lot of money. Do you want us to teach him a lesson and help the great master vent his anger? During the conversation, the shopkeeper of the shop talked about what he heard, and it also involved Yang Chun. Of course, the shopkeeper wanted to please Yang Chun. Perhaps the main reason was that this guy ruined the market and caused public indignation. It's a deal where money is exchanged and goods are exchanged. Both parties are willing. There's no such thing as cheating. Yang Chun said very casually, "I am in a hurry to buy a batch of cave magic treasures, and he happens to have them. It's just spirit stones. It's not a problem if the price is a little higher. Yang Chun downplayed it, and the shopkeeper also knew that Yang Chun did not lack spirit stones. Since Yang Chun did not want to pursue the matter, the shopkeeper was very tactful and did not continue. If it was someone else who said this, the shopkeeper would definitely think that the guy was embarrassed to admit it and was just being stubborn. But Yang Chun said this, it must be this, meaning it was not a lie. A few words of dialogue was just an occasional episode. No one would care. Soon, Yang Chun swept away all the space magic treasures in this shop. Some people have already done the statistics, including the ones Yang Chun's family bought and collected through Wandao Tower. Yang Chun spent more than 1 million best quality spirit stones to buy these space magic treasures. This was just the spirit stones, the elixir magic treasures, and so on were never taken out. The wealth of this family could definitely make some people who claim to be rich feel ashamed to death. The following days were calm, and there were no more accidents. After Yang Chun and the women successfully collected 3 large caves of 100,000 miles, the purpose of this trip has basically been completely achieved. From now on, there is no need to plunder any cave houses. Yang Chun finally announced the cessation of the purchase of cave houses. Just wait for a Ling to refine all these. We can wait for Big Brother Li Cheng to see what is behind the demon continent. Then shall we go back now? The women had been out for a long time, and they had enough of shopping along the way. Everyone wanted to go back and cultivate quietly. Don't worry, there is one more thing worth our trip. Yang Chun shook his head. After we get it, we will go back together. Chapter 2060. What Yang Chun wanted was naturally the immortal sword that caused countless bloodshed in his previous life. Although the immortal sword should appear in the world after 1,000 years, according to his memory, it really appeared in the world. Now the so-called immortal sword was just an ordinary flying sword, placed on a shelf, and no one cared about it. The main reason for wanting this immortal sword was for Shi Shanshan. Now Shi Shanshan majored in the supreme pure yang sword qi. In terms of a single point of attack power, Shi Shanshan was the best among the women. This was recognized by everyone. Even Zhou Xianying, who was at the 6th grade of the Heavenly Immortal Realm, could use the Heavenly Phoenix Zither to defeat hundreds of enemies. She also admitted this. The Heavenly Phoenix Zither was a group attack, while the Supreme Pure Yang Sword Qi was aimed at one point. There was no comparison between the two. From the experience of the discovery of the super-huge Immortal's Cave, it could be seen that even if Zhou Xianying made a move, she could not break the solid courtyard wall. But Shi Shanshan only needed one sword to make a hole. Unfortunately, Shi Shanshan's supreme pure yang sword qi was pure enough, and the lethality was strong enough, but there was a fatal weakness. That was, Shi Shanshan could not attack with all her strength. Once she attacked with all her strength, she would immediately become weak, and if she did not recover for a period of time, she would not be able to send out the second sword qi. In other words, even if Shi Shanshan, who was at the Earth Immortal level, met a Xian Immortal Master, Shi Shanshan could still win. But as long as this Xian Immortal Master had a companion, Shi Shanshan may not be his opponent. The supreme pure Yang Sword Qi was something left by Ancestor Lu, and Shi Shanshan has not been able to truly control it freely. The reason was that, on the one hand, Shi Shanshan's cultivation base was too low, and the level of the supreme pure Yang Sword Qi was too high. On the other hand, it was the limitation of Shi Shanshan's life source flying sword. Shi Shanshan's life source flying sword was personally refined in the mortal world. At that time, she plundered a lot of good things from the Green Jade Immortal Island, and after refining it, it was also very powerful. In his previous life, Shi Shanshan had relied on this natal flying sword to slaughter her enemies. But in this life, Yang Chun has changed some of Shi Shanshan's cultivation trajectory. Not only did she have more experience in the demon continent, but she also had less internal strife in the sect, but she also collected a supreme pure Yang Sword Qi that countless people dream of. Without the supreme pure Yang Sword Qi, Shi Shanshan's natal flying sword wouldn't be a problem even if she used it in the immortal world. But now, as his cultivation level increased, his understanding of the pure Yang Sword Qi increased as well. The intrinsic flying sword was no longer able to withstand the supreme, pure yang sword qi. The intrinsic flying sword has become more and more restrictive to Shi Shan Shan, and Yang Chun has to consider the problem of Shi Shan Shan. The legendary Immortal sword naturally fell into the eyes of Yang Chun. Coincidentally, the name of the Immortal sword was also called Pure Yang Immortal Sword. He didn't know if it was a coincidence or something else. Anyway, Yang Chun has regarded this Pure Yang Immortal Sword as the next intrinsic flying sword of Shi Shan Shan. According to Yang Chun's original intention, he was not sure whether this Pure Yang Immortal Sword was still in the original shop, so he just went to try his luck. After all, the demonic tribulation was advanced by hundreds of years, and the whole process was shortened by hundreds of years. Some things must have changed, just like the Immortal's Cave and the Wind and Cloud Palace. If he could find it, it would be the best. If he couldn't find it, Yang Chun would wait a little longer, as long as Wanbao Tower and Drunken Immortal paid more attention. In any case, it was on the way to get there, so he just took it as a way to enjoy the scenery on his way back. The tree longs for peace, but the wind does not stop. Yang Chun originally thought that his family would return to the sect peacefully, but unfortunately, they encountered some trouble. The people who attacked them were aiming to kill them in one blow, and without any greetings, they directly attacked. The whereabouts of Yang Chun and his family were not kept secret. So many people could guess where they were going from their itinerary. These cultivators had prepared for at least a few months for this attack. They had arranged everything here, and were just waiting for Yang Chun and his family to come to their door. The meticulously arranged concealment array made it so that the women did not discover the other party's hidden tracks. These days, because of the Golden Immortal Tribulation, Yang Chun could not use it easily. It was not until they were 100 miles away from the ambush that the women discovered the other party's traces. However, for those experts who were lying in ambush, they were already inside the ambush. With an order, hundreds of experts launched an attack at the same time. At the same time, the array that had been set up underground suddenly launched an attack. The sudden attack surprised the women, but they were surprised, they did not panic, and they began to resist the attack in an orderly manner. 8 rays of light suddenly pierced from 8 directions, coinciding with the position of the 8 trigrams, and gathered towards Yang Chun in the center. The women subconsciously blocked Yang Chun. Their husband could not make a move. Although he had the protection of the Golden Body incantation, it was okay to withstand 1 or 2 attacks, but with them present, how could they allow others' attacks to fall on their husband? Gao Yu's 100 Spirits battle armor and Sun Qingshue's Black Tortoise shield were immediately unfolded, and they were about to meet the 8 rays of light. Even the tower ship, controlled by Gong Sunling, also emitted a light, protecting Yang Chun in it. The dragon puppets were a step faster, directly surrounding everyone in a circle. You can't. Yang Chun found that it was not right in the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, and immediately shouted. It was a little too late to use voice to inform them now. Fortunately, everyone had been cultivating the improved supreme mystery Yin-Yang Heart Sutra for a long time, and Yang Chun could easily communicate with everyone. Retreat to the geographical map of mountains and rivers. Yang Chen's thought was fast enough, and the women's reaction was fast enough. Gong Sunling opened the geographical map of mountains and rivers almost instantly, and put everyone in the map. First, Tao Junqi, Shi Wu Shuang, and Shi Shan Shan. Then Lady Fanghua, who was at the fairy immortal level, and her 30 concubines. Then Sun Qingxue, Gao Yu, and Yang Chun, who had protective magic treasures, and finally the Murong sisters, who were protected by the golden immortal level dragon puppet. Just when the huge body of the dragon puppet was about to disappear at the edge of the geographical map of mountains and rivers, the 8 rays of light had already touched the body of the dragon puppet. Chi, on the body of the middle stage golden immortal dragon puppet, there were suddenly 8 more holes. The tough dragon scales and dragon skin had no effect and were directly pierced. Fortunately, most of the dragon puppet had entered the geographical map of mountains and rivers. The other party's attack was only concentrated on the dragon puppet's skin and did not enter the dragon puppet's body, and then immediately hit the geographical map of mountains and rivers. Boom, 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 a violent explosion occurred inside the geographical map of mountains and rivers. The land within thousands of miles was directly lifted up and then instantly turned into the finest smoke and dust, fluttering for a long time before slowly disappearing. What a terrible attack power! Everyone clearly saw this scene in the geographical map of mountains and rivers, and their hearts were shocked. Destroying thousands of miles of land at once was not something that one or two Xian Immortal Masters could do. Chapter 2061. Heaven and Earth Immortal Extinguishing Formation. Yang Chun spat out a formation that was very strange to the women. It actually appeared here interesting. What formation is this? Gong Sunling was an array cultivator and was the most sensitive to formations. When she heard the name of a formation that she had never heard of, she immediately asked, regardless of the fact that everyone was being attacked. A formation of the immortal world. Yang Chun replied with a solemn face. The attack power is extraordinary. The only weakness is that it needs to be set up for a long time in advance, and it needs at least 100 Xian Immortal Masters to control when attacking. It can kill a Golden Immortal Master. Fortunately, Yang Chun recognized this formation in advance, so he decisively let the women retreat into the Mountain River geographical map. Now, the Mountain River geographical map had integrated countless small cave mansions, plus a few large cave mansions and a super large cave mansion that was halfway integrated. The defensive power had reached the extreme, so Yang Chun could rest assured to use the Mountain River geographical map to resist the attack of the Heaven and Earth Immortal Extinguishing Formation. No matter how strong the attack was, it could only be concentrated in a few points. It was absolutely impossible to destroy a radius of 100,000 miles with one blow. This was also the reason why Yang Chun was confident in the Mountain River geographical map. The magic treasure of the cave mansion was like this. Its defensive power was amazing. However, the most terrible thing was to be controlled from the outside. In the past, the cave mansions of the Three River Alliance, Holocaust Sect, and 10,000 Demon Sect, and the recent Wind Cloud Palace were so convenient for Yang Chun. As long as it was not controlled from the outside, there were very few cultivators in the spiritual world who could destroy the big cave mansion in the spiritual world. A small manor of 10 or 100 miles might be possible, but a big cave mansion that was more than 100,000 miles was absolutely impossible. Ling, I'll leave it to you. Yang Chun said to Gong Sunling and gave her a look of certainty. Hundreds of Xian Immortal Masters against one. The other party is definitely not a match. Just destroy the Masters in one direction. This was a move that Gong Sunling had used in the past. Back when they had first arrived in the spirit plane to destroy Qi Min's sect, Gong Sunling, who was at the human immortal stage, had fought against an earthen immortal stage expert. In just a flash, she had gathered the combined might of over 1,000 human immortals from the geographical map of mountains and rivers to kill off her opponent. Yang Chun wanted her to repeat the same trick. Gong Sunling was not a stubborn person. She nodded and flashed out of the geographical map of mountains and rivers. The Mountain River geographical map was Gong Sunling's life source magic weapon. At this time, it was worn like a robe on Gong Sunling's body, so there was no need to worry about outside attacks. Boom! Gong Sunling's figure had just appeared when the celestial extinguishing formation of Cosmos struck again. In the middle of the geographical map of mountains and rivers, a space with a radius of 1,000 miles instantly turned into powder. However, Gong Sunling herself was safe and sound. The destroyed space in the geographical map of mountains and rivers was also slowly repaired under the control of the third primordial spirit. Looking at the speed, it would take a few days to restore to its original state. Gong Sunling took advantage of the gap in the opponent's attack and rushed in another direction. In that direction, there were more than a dozen Xian Immortal Masters, each holding an array disc to control it. Seeing Gong Sunling flying over, one of the Xian Immortal Masters immediately gave up controlling the array disc, summoned the flying sword, and slashed at Gong Sunling. "Let me do it!" Shi Shan, who was in the geographical map of mountains and rivers, was very unhappy. These people were too despicable. As a senior master, they still used sneak attacks. She shouted at the sky, and then released the supreme, pure yang sword chi with all her strength. Of course, Gong Sunling could hear it. Seeing Shi Shanshan like this, she also cooperated. Just at the moment when Shi Shanshan released the sword chi, Gong Sunling controlled the geographical map of mountains and rivers to open up a hole, just in time to release the supreme, pure yang sword chi. The Xian Immortal Master who attacked was facing the sword chi. In his eyes, Gong Sunling was a mere junior Earth immortal who relied on the power of the protective magic treasure to survive. Could it be that he would lose to an Earth Immortal Junior in a face-to-face attack? Without thinking, the Xian Immortal Master directly went to meet the pure Yang Sword Chi. Chi, an extremely light sound rang out, and the Xian Immortal Master's movements directly froze on the spot. After a few breaths of time, a bloody spot appeared on his chest, and then slowly expanded. The Xian Immortal Master also fell to the ground with a loud bang. The supreme pure yang sword chi's momentum did not dissipate. After passing through the Xian Immortal Master who attacked, it went through the two Xian Immortal Masters who were standing behind him, controlling the array disc before disappearing. She took the lives of 3 Xian Immortal Masters in one move. This scene scared the fellas who were still controlling the array disc. They no longer dared to be so careless and ignore Gong Sunling's attack. One by one, they gave up controlling the array disc and surrounded Gong Sunling. More than 10 masters gave up controlling the Qianquan extinguishing immortal formation. At least one direction of the formation was no longer useful. In fact, without this direction, this formation was no longer a complete formation, and it no longer had that much power. Facing more than 10 Xian Immortal Masters who charged at Gong Sunling was not afraid. She raised her hand and clenched her small fist and punched towards the fellas closest to her. Seeing that Gong Sunling did not use that terrifying sword chi, the other party also laughed sinisterly. If a Xian Immortal Master was afraid of an Earth Immortal Junior, he would never be able to raise his head in this lifetime. Without thinking, he punched towards Gong Sunling's fist. Boom! A long sound lasted for at least 2 breaths of time. The 2 fists collided, and the 2 figures stopped on the spot. It was as if time had suddenly stopped. The sound finally ended. That Xian Immortal Master maintained the posture of punching. He moved his lips and wanted to say something, but blood immediately gushed out of his 7 orifices. Just like that, he maintained the posture of punching and fell down with a loud bang. In the end, he still could not say a word. Everyone was shocked. A puny Earth Immortal Master actually killed a Xian Immortal Master with one punch. How is this possible? No one could have imagined that the punch, just now, was actually a punch from that Xian Immortal Master and the hundreds of Xian Immortal Masters in the mountain and river geographical map. No matter how high his cultivation level was, he could not escape from this kind of continuous battle. The people around Yangchun were all monstrous. This had almost become the consensus of all the cultivators in the spiritual realm. Now that 4 Xian Immortal Masters had died consecutively, Yangchen's family was not hurt at all, and the Qinquan Immortal Extinguishing Formation had also lost its effect. Seeing that the figure of the dragon puppet had already appeared beside Gong Sunling, those Xian Immortal Masters also understood that the situation was hopeless. Retreat. The guys who attacked were capable and decisive when they attacked, and they did not hesitate when they retreated. Knowing that the situation was hopeless, the leading guy immediately shouted for retreat. In the blink of an eye, all the surrounding cultivators fled, leaving only the corpses of the 4 Xian Immortal Masters. "Husband, who are these guys? Why did they attack us?" Shi Wushuang asked after everything had calmed down and everyone had cleaned up the battlefield. The Qinquan Immortal Extinguishing Formation was no longer a threat. Chapter 2062. No one knew the answer. The 4 Xian Immortal experts were very unfamiliar, and no one could recognize their identity. However, when they checked the magic weapons on the 4 of them, they found a small medicine garden on one of them. In the medicine garden, there was actually an acquaintance of Yangchun. Although it was an acquaintance, in fact, it was just a passing acquaintance. It was the shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion where Yang Chun bought the super huge Immortal cave last time. This wretched profiteer had his cultivation sealed and was thrown into the medicine garden, unable to move. If the women hadn't found him, he didn't know how long he would have been sealed. Grandmaster Yang helped. Seeing Yang Chen's figure, the shopkeeper immediately rushed to Yang Chun and cried. The sound of his voice was simply heartbreaking. It was even more miserable than the death of his parents. Don't talk nonsense. Tell me, why are you here, and why did you bring people to attack me? Yang Chen didn't care about his words and directly asked. This guy was actually a smart person. As soon as he was released, he noticed that the faces of the women were not right, so he immediately cried to Yang Chun. He knew which one of these people was the real master. When Yang Chun spoke, he immediately stopped crying and secretly looked at the women who still had unkind expressions. He didn't dare to hide anything, and quickly said what he knew. In fact, everything was because of the shabby pavilion opened by this guy. Usually, he relied on that little trick to earn some spirit stones. As long as it wasn't too excessive, the others were too lazy to care about him. At most, the victims who were deceived would come back to find him, and then he would rely on the fact that it was a voluntary transaction to find the management of the makeshift market, and the others couldn't do anything to him. The cultivators who often appeared in the makeshift market knew his background and would rarely be deceived by him. He only deceived foreign cultivators like Yang Chun, just like some shops. If they didn't open for business for 3 years, once they opened, they would eat for 3 years, swaying back and forth. They wouldn't starve to death. Although it was said that there were good things in his shabby pavilion, but basically, the cultivators who bought things from him didn't find any good magic weapons. Those unlucky cultivators could only treat it as learning from their mistakes and never visit again. His days were originally very comfortable, especially after he completed a big business deal with Yang Chun. With a large amount of spirit stones in his hands, he could cultivate in peace. But after Yang Chun passed by, things were fundamentally different. If ordinary cultivators were deceived, it was because those cultivators had no foresight. It was normal for them to be deceived. But who was Yang Chun? Was he someone who didn't know what was good for him and could be deceived? Who had ever seen Yang Chun being taken advantage of? Since Yang Chun bought those spatial magic treasures at a high price without batting an eyelid, it meant that there must be something extraordinary inside. Of course, in reality, those people guessed correctly. Smart people must have thought that Yang Chun began to buy space magic weapons and put them into action a long time ago. For this reason, he also paid the price of millions of kilograms of top-grade spirit stones. Maybe it was for a certain Immortal's cave in this acid pavilion. So, the poor profiteer was out of luck. It didn't take long for people to find him and ask in detail what Yang Chun bought at that time, which thing he spent the longest time on, and so on. Which cultivator wouldn't be tempted by a spatial magic treasure that could make Yang Chun use millions of best great spirit stones to set up this trap? With such a high price, even if it was just a magic treasure from the immortal world, it could still be bought at the highest level. So what did Yang Chun get in the end? Soon, these people gathered hundreds of Xian immortal experts, and then calmly set up on the path that Yang Chun must pass through, and then waited for Yang Chen's family to walk into the trap. As for what happened later, the shopkeeper was not very clear until Yang Chun released him from the medicine garden. Among them, Yang Chun thought of a lot of problems. At least, there was a problem with the shopkeeper of the shop who said he would teach this guy a lesson in the marketplace last time. He said that he was defending Yang Chun, but in fact, he wanted to know from Yang Chen's mouth whether he felt that he had been taken advantage of. Speaking of which, these guys had a very keen sense of smell. They could actually infer from such a small thing that Yang Chun had obtained a good thing. Unfortunately, they calculated the way to kill the dragon puppet, but did not think of Gong Sunling's mountain river geographical map. However, these guys must have also thought that Yang Chun must have obtained a super powerful cave from Gong Sunling's ability to resist the attack of the extinguishing heaven and earth immortal formation, and they were afraid that there would be a lot of things because of this in the future. It was just that these people must not know what the mountain river geographical map had become, and it would be in vain no matter how much they thought about it. However, The appearance of the extinguishing heaven and earth immortal formation in the spiritual world was very surprising. Super sect rarely passed down the formation of the immortal world. This would make their disciples to pursue high-level cultivation methods and forget to lay the foundation, which was a big taboo. To have the ability to send down the formation of the immortal world and easily gather hundreds of strange Xian immortal experts, I am afraid that only the Zhao family had the greatest possibility. Because of the golden immortal tribulation in the sea of consciousness, Yang Chun rarely paid attention to Yang Lan's thoughts, so he did not know Yang Lan's recent situation. It seemed that it was necessary to rush back to meet brotherly Cheng and see if he could quickly solve the trouble of the golden immortal tribulation. For the sake of selling me a super magic weapon, I will let you go this time. Facing the shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion, Yang Chun did not want to deal with him more. This guy was purely asking for it, so he did not deserve sympathy. You can go wherever you want, but don't follow us. Master Yang, please spare my life. When the shopkeeper heard Yang Chen's words, he immediately began to plead. My lowly life is not worth the Grandmaster's concern. Please, Grandmaster, for the sake of me selling you a magic weapon, please spare my life. I'm not going to kill you. Why spare your life? Yang Chun frowned. This guy's words were really inexplicable. Master, if you let me leave now, I will definitely die without a burial place. The shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion was also a smart person, so he immediately explained, Master, please let me follow you for a period of time. There is a good friend of mine ahead. As long as I reach the place, I will leave immediately and will never dare to disturb Master again. Where's your good friend? Hearing this, Yang Chen became interested and asked. In the market of Locket Mountain. He opened a small shop called the Lost Star Pavilion, which also deals in magic weapons. The shopkeeper did not dare to be negligent and immediately answered. Locket Mountain Market's Lost Star Pavilion. Yang Chun muttered this name and couldn't help sighing in his heart. It seemed that he and the shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion were really fated. The shop of a good friend that he knew was actually the shop where the pure Yang immortal sword was. Speaking of which, wasn't this guy and his friend's luck too heaven-defying? A huge cave abode and an immortal sword actually appeared in their shop. Unfortunately, the two of them did not recognize any of them. Chapter 2063. Since he had encountered such a thing, Yang Chan certainly could not let it go easily. As for taking the shopkeeper of the acid pavilion to his friend's side, it was a piece of cake. It was just a matter of cutting grass and hunting rabbits. It was just that after the sudden attack not long ago, the women were still very concerned about Yang Chen's safety. Yang Chen was no longer allowed to take the slow and unobstructed ship. Except for Gong Sun Ling, everyone entered the mountain river geographical map. In fact, the speed of the ship wasn't as slow as what the girls said because of the water, splitting wings, and the modification of the shark skin of the parting hatred ocean. But Yang Chen wouldn't refuse the girls' kind intentions. Even the shopkeeper was thrown into the mountain river geographical map. In any case, the situation inside was controlled by Gong Sunling, so it was impossible for him to see anything that he shouldn't see. Gong Sunling rode on Murong Bai's iron-winged eagle and flew towards the Locket Mountain where the Lost Star Pavilion was located. Speaking of iron-winged eagles, Tao Junki, Shi Wushuang, and the Murong sisters each had one, and their cultivation was similar to theirs. When they transcended their tribulations, they did it together with their demonic beasts. Now, these demonic beasts were also in the earthly immortal realm. Looking at the iron-winged eagles, Yang Chun was also reminded of his demonic beast, Roaring Sky. Roaring Sky had been cultivating in the Dragon Pagoda ever since he came to the spiritual world and had never gone out to transcend his tribulation. Yang Chun didn't even know what realm he had reached. But since the Dragon Clan could freely control the timing of the tribulation, perhaps Roaring Sky felt that the time wasn't right. The Locket Mountain wasn't far, so it only took the iron-winged eagle 3 days to arrive. Perhaps it was because of their fast speed, they weren't intercepted or attacked along the way and arrived at their destination without a hitch. On the way back, Yang Chen's family still acted as usual. The girls strolled around, while Yang Chun casually walked around and plundered all the spatial artifact from the merchants. In the market, one could only buy a cave abode that was 10,000 miles long at most, which was already of the highest quality. The bigger ones were the treasures of the major sect, and they wouldn't be taken out easily. Even a cave abode that was 10,000 miles long wasn't cheap. Most of them were smaller than 1,000 miles long. As usual, Yang Chun entered a small shop called the Lost Star Pavilion without arousing anyone's suspicion. But the difference this time was that Yang Chun had Shi Shanshan by his side. The reason why Shi Shanshan accompanied Yang Chun was because she was afraid that her husband wouldn't be able to make a move. Yang Chun also personally picked her. Shi Shanshan accompanied Yang Chun. First, she was afraid that there would be an accident and her husband could not do it. Second, Yang Chun personally called the roll. The pure Yang Immortal sword was likely to be found here, which was prepared for Shi Shanshan. After sweeping a few glances at the shelves of the Lost Star Pavilion, Yang Chun knew that the goods in this shop weren't that great. Most of the goods were very ordinary, of average quality, and looked a little old. It was obvious that they were second-hand goods. Wait, look old? A thought suddenly flashed through Yang Chen's mind. Could it be that these things weren't newly forged, but were these ancient items that the shopkeeper had obtained from an ancient tomb or some other place? Thinking about it this way, the goods in the Lost Star Pavilion were exactly the same as the goods here. Furthermore, the two shopkeepers had some connections. Could it be that their goods were the same? If that was the case, it was possible that the huge cave abode and the pure Yang Immortal sword were the same inheritance. The shopkeeper had a personality and didn't hire any assistants. He sat alone in a corner and drank his tea, completely ignoring the people who came in. This attitude was probably a way to attract customers, to give them the feeling that their goods weren't ordinary and that they didn't care whether they bought it or not. When they walked closer to the shelves, Yang Chun and Shi Shanshan almost couldn't help but burst out in laughter. The goods here weren't anything special, but their names were very exaggerated. Things like exterminating immortal sword, 8 treasures heaven supporting trident, mixed heaven sash, heaven and earth ring, etc. These legendary treasures were actually all here. Some of the items Yang Chun had seen before didn't look right at all. One look, and he could tell that they were fake goods. However, this small shop still had them on display, and the prices weren't low. It was simply shameless to the extreme. Before Yang Chun could take a look, the cold and elegant Shi Shanshan pointed at one of the treasures and couldn't help but laugh. One must know that Shi Shanshan always had a cold face in front of outsiders. Only in front of her husband would she be a little more relaxed. Now, she actually laughed in front of the shopkeeper. She must have seen a big joke. Yang Chun took a closer look, and his expression couldn't help but become interesting. There was a very domineering-looking treasured saber over there. The quality was very ordinary, but it looked very good and majestic. When he looked at the label of the saber, the words, Immortal Beheading Saber, were written on it. This kind of thing dared to be called Immortal Beheading Saber? Yang Chun wanted to chop off the shopkeeper's head with this saber, but he couldn't do anything. No one said that your saber was called Immortal Beheading Saber, so other people's sabers couldn't be called Immortal Beheading Saber. Moreover, strictly speaking, the real Immortal Beheading Saber was still in the Immortal Beheading platform. Yang Chen's saber was also considered a fake. Husband, this saber is much more majestic than yours. It was rare for Shi Shanshan to have a childish heart and joke in front of her husband. She covered her small mouth and almost couldn't stop laughing. But speaking of which, this saber looked very majestic and had a different style from the Immortal Beheading Saber. Combined with Yang Chen's muscular appearance, it was indeed more majestic than the real Immortal Beheading Saber. Yang Chen's head was full of black lines. He really didn't know how to describe the shamelessness of the shopkeeper, but he couldn't do anything about it. It was very uncomfortable. Esteemed guest, you like this saber? Good eyesight. Hearing Shi Shanshan mention the Immortal Beheading Saber, the shopkeeper who had been sitting still finally spoke. He stood up and slowly walked to the two of them. He pointed at the Immortal Beheading Saber and introduced it. This is the legendary saber from the Heavenly Court's Immortal Beheading platform. Speaking up to this point, he saw Yang Chun and Shi Shanshan's mocking expression and changed the topic. It was refined from the leftovers of the Immortal beheading platform. The materials are first-rate, but it has been a long time since a cultivator spent the effort to refine it. That's why it is in such a dilapidated state. As he spoke, the shopkeeper reached out to pick up the saber and presented it to Sir Shanshan with both hands. How could a businessman not have good eyesight? When a man and a woman came together, the woman could still laugh at the man. Was there a need to ask who was in charge of this business? Esteemed guest, you really have excellent eyesight. He first praised the customer's eyesight. After all, this kind of flattery was free. A treasured saber is a gift for a beauty. If esteemed guest really likes it, our humble shop can be friends. You can give the cost price and take it away at a discount. Chapter 2064. He's lucky. Yang Chun answered simply, and the shopkeeper instantly let out a sigh of relief. This was where the shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion was smarter than the guy from the Cold Acid Pavilion. He also marked the items at a high price, but sold them at a normal price. Not only did he not attract any suspicion, but the buyers rarely asked about the price. It was just that his bad taste in naming really made people not know whether to laugh or cry. Speaking of which, your items are quite interesting. Looks like they came from the same place. Yangchen didn't care about their expressions and just said, I can teach you a lesson. Not only will you make a small profit, but it will also save you a lot of trouble in the future. The solid flying sword was made of a special material and was very sturdy. Just as the shopkeeper said, other than using it as a flying sword to attack, it could also be used to block some attacks. However, it was still a lot worse than the pure Yang Immortal sword that Yangchen was hoping for. Plus, there were no signs of a hidden sword inside. Guessing Yangchen's identity, the shopkeeper no longer pretended to be profound. He diligently sent tea and snacks. Then he ran back to the shelf and held more than a dozen magic weapons of the space type, including the Immortal's Cave and the Medicine Garden. According to the price here, it was indeed 10 times higher than the normal price. However, the shopkeeper was smart and found a reason to reduce the discount, making it more or less the same as the normal price. Even if there wasn't a reason, maybe this guy would allow them to bargain and the result would be the same. This is simply fate. The shopkeeper's ability to reply was definitely top-notch. After speaking, he quickly appeared beside the shelf and took the pure Yang Immortal sword, respectfully handing it to Yang Chun. Esteemed customer, look, this is a top-quality flying sword. Take it back and make it the sex heirloom. Yang Chun casually put the Immortal beheading blade and pure Yang Immortal sword in his virtue ring, and then continued, if you have any spatial magic treasures, take them all out and give me a real price. I'll take them all. All he did was sell me a batch of spatial magic treasures that were similar to yours at several times the price. Yang Chun was also telling the truth. However, he was rather unlucky. Because I personally bought it, he was chased after. Space-type magic treasure? The shopkeeper was stunned, and then he suddenly remembered that Yang Chun had just introduced himself to Chunyang Palace. He immediately reacted, and the smile on his face became wider. It turns out to be Master Yang. My apologies. Grandmaster, please take a seat. I'll bring you the spatial treasure you asked for right away. At this point, looking at Yang Chen's mocking expression, the shopkeeper couldn't continue. He laughed dryly and said, that might be an exaggeration, but I can't deny that this sword is definitely worth the money. It can be used as a flying sword and a shield. It's a rare item. In all fairness, the items here were barely above average in the spiritual realm. However, they were nothing in the eyes of Yang Chen's family. For an ordinary cultivator, it was enough to be a natal flying sword. The shopkeeper's face immediately turned a little pale, but he still asked worriedly, then, is he all right? Grandmaster, you really have sharp eyes. You're right. The shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion immediately said, to be honest with you, Grandmaster, we found these things in an ancient tomb that we found by accident. However, there are several levels in the ancient tomb, and we only entered the second level. If Grandmaster is interested, we're willing to tell you the location of the ancient tomb. Before Yang Chun had time to speak, Sir Shanshan, who was next to him, had already made the decision while holding back her laughter. I'll buy it. Yeah. There's a pure, young, immortal sword here? Yang Chan said in surprise, as if he was really surprised. My sect is called Chunyang Palace, and this sword is called Pure Yang Immortal Sword. Is this fate? Yang Chun was also a little surprised that it was found in an ancient tomb. Cultivators rarely built tombs for themselves, and the owner of this ancient tomb was a little interesting. Yang Chun picked them up and looked at them one by one. At this point, he was completely sure that this item from the Lost Star Pavilion and the Shabby Pavilion came from the same place. Not to mention, there were 6 or 7 items that were similar to the 10-mile manor that Yang Chun received last time. The techniques were also very similar. Yang Chun reached out and took the Pure Yang Immortal Sword with a smile. He held it in his hand and waited a few times. He released his spiritual awareness and began to explore. Well said, well said. Since we're buying it together, we'll give you the same discount, 10% off. After selling 2 magic treasures, the shopkeeper was also happy and sincerely quoted a price. For the sake of the name, I'll buy it. Give me the actual price. Yang Chun did not hesitate and said directly. After Yang Chun finished explaining, he had already released the shopkeeper of the Shabby Pavilion. When the two met, they did not have the expression of good friends who had not seen each other for a long time. Instead, they both had the same frown and indescribable sorrow. Actually, it's very simple. From the moment I walked out of this door, you announced with great fanfare that I bought a batch of space magic treasures here according to the price you marked. Since they had reached a deal, Yang Chun did not mind telling them the method. The most important thing is that I personally chose 2 flying swords. I guarantee that all of these goods were sold according to the price on your shelf. Just as he was about to send them back in disappointment, Yang Chun suddenly thought of the unique courtyard wall of the colossal Immortal Mansion. The material of that courtyard wall was something that could block out spiritual awareness. At the core of the flying sword tip, there was a rice grain sized that gave him the same feeling. But soon, it will be your turn to run out of luck, Yang Chun said with a smile. Looking at the puzzled expression of the shopkeeper, he explained, I personally chose 2 flying swords from your Lost Star Pavilion. That guy? I know him. The shopkeeper hurriedly nodded his head and then asked with a little uncertainty, could it be that Grandmaster has seen him before? Did he deceive Grandmaster? The shopkeeper's selling price was very realistic. After Yang Chun directly accepted all of them according to the discount he gave, he then held back his excitement and said, Shopkeeper, I don't know if you know a shopkeeper of the Shabby Pavilion. At this point, Yang Chun stopped and looked at the 2 of them. The 2 of them were both business veterans. How could they not know that Yang Chun was waiting for a good price? The 2 of them looked at each other and nodded at the same time, as if they had made a decision at the same time. The expression on the face of the Lost Star Pavilion shopkeeper could only be described as wonderful. In just a short while, his expression changed several times. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. Because a customer would run out of luck after buying something from his shop, this sounded as ridiculous as it could be. However, he could not laugh because he saw a familiar person. Sure Shan had just made the decision to buy the incomparably majestic beheading Immortal Saber. In the blink of an eye, Yang Chun saw a Pure Yang Immortal Sword on the shelf not far away. He was immediately overjoyed. At the same time, he felt a little nervous. It couldn't be that easy, right? Chapter 2065. As soon as this idea came out, the 2 shopkeepers' eyes suddenly lit up. Previously, the guy from the poor pavilion tried to hide it, but he was almost killed. Now that the news was out in the open, there was no need to worry about it anymore. As Yang Chun said, this was definitely a profitable business. The shopkeeper of the poor pavilion kept beating his chest and stamping his feet. Such a good idea. Why didn't he think of it from the beginning? If he had known earlier, why would he have suffered so much? What if someone asks about the source of the goods? The shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion thought more and immediately asked. Then he suddenly realized that it was not a good idea and quickly explained, Grandmaster, I don't have any other meaning. It's just that if we tell you the location of the ancient tomb, what if others want to know about it? The things in your store don't just come from there, right? Yang Chen's spiritual consciousness swept out casually and then directly pointed to the shelves one by one. The shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion followed the direction of Yang Chen's finger and looked at it one by one. his heart filled with admiration. The things that Yang Chan pointed out were all things that he had collected from various places over the years. There were also cultivators who came to his store to sell them, but none of them came from the ancient tomb. In other words, Yang Chun had already seen through all the things that he had obtained from the ancient tomb at a glance. With this kind of eyesight, no wonder the rumors outside said that Yang Chen's eyesight was very good. It really was a well-deserved reputation. Thank you, Grandmaster, for your guidance. The shopkeeper of the poor pavilion wanted to say something, but was directly stopped by the shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion. The shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion cupped his hands towards Yang Chun, thanked him, and then handed over a piece of jade strip. This records the location of the ancient tomb, as well as the process of us brothers entering the first 2 floors. Please accept it, Grandmaster. The shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion was very straightforward. After so many years of not entering the 3rd floor of the ancient tomb, he also knew that the hope was slim. Giving it to Yang Chun, not only would they send away a big problem, but they would also be able to use Yang Chen's reputation to hype up and make a small profit, which was more than enough for them. If you can't survive in the future, you can go to Wanbao Tower. Yang Chun was grateful that the other party was single. He directly gave them a strong backing. As for whether they were willing or not, that would depend on their own choices. The Locket Mountains market was bustling with activity today. Yang Chun and Shi Shanshan had just left the Lost Star Pavilion. The shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion stood at the door of the Lost Star Pavilion and began to publicize. Grandmaster Yang of the Pure Yang Palace bought more than a dozen space magic weapons at 10 times the price and also bought 2 flying swords. When the news spread out, the entire Locket Mountain was in an uproar. The surrounding cultivators swarmed in, and in the blink of an eye, the Forgotten Star Pavilion was completely filled. Not only cultivators, but the other stores in the Locket Mountain also sent people over. Some of them even had the shopkeepers personally visiting the Lost Star Pavilion. The surrounding businesses were quite familiar with this Lost Star Pavilion. However, they had never paid much attention to it. The only thing they knew was that this fellow had a bad taste in naming magic treasures. Rather than calling it the Lost Star Pavilion, it would be more accurate to call it a shop that sold legendary treasures. But now most people want to know what Master Yang Chen chose, and the people who asked were also focused on this question. Grandmaster Yang bought all the spatial artifacts in the store. One of them is called the Firmament Palace, one is called the Tishita Palace, one is called the Jade Lake, and one is called the Peach Garden. The shopkeeper proudly listed out a series of names that made everyone feel an urge to beat him up. How could a lousy store like yours have those? Furthermore, Grandmaster Yang also bought 2 legendary flying swords. The shopkeeper didn't feel that there was anything wrong with that and continued, both flying swords are of supreme quality. There's only one shop like this in the world. Were those flying swords? Speak clearly. Someone finally lost his patience and hollered. This was the voice of all the cultivators in the shop who were listening to this guy's boasting. As soon as this voice came out, all of them cheered loudly. Listen up, this is the eyes of a grandmaster. The shopkeeper also knew that he went a bit overboard, so he laughed and continued. One is the legendary Immortal beheading blade of the Heavenly Court, and the other is the pure Yang Immortal sword of the Celestial Realm Supreme Being Lu Dongbin. After hearing the answer, all the cultivators laughed at the same time. So it was because of these 2 names. They thought Grandmaster Yang had found another powerful flying sword. As long as the people who paid attention to Yang Chen were basically clear, Grandmaster Yang Chen's magic weapon was called Beheading Immortal Blade. Seeing someone with the same name here, he probably bought it because he wanted to join in on the fun. Anyway, Grandmaster Yang didn't lack spirit stones. As for the pure Yang Immortal sword, it was even more so. Grandmaster Yang's sect was called Chunyang Palace. Although it definitely had nothing to do with Ancestor Lu, it did have some connection with the pure Yang Immortal sword, so it was normal for it to be bought. These 2 names made everyone less interested in the goods here. However, since Grandmaster Yang was willing to buy it for 10 times the amount of spirit stones, there might really be something that could catch his eye. Since they were already here, they had to take a look. What if they found something that others didn't like? I want this plant and fan. While everyone was choosing, A wretched guy pointed at a plantain fan-like magic treasure and shouted. Sometimes, many things just lacked a leader. Someone was clamoring to buy it. And at this moment, the others weren't thinking that this guy was a sucker, but that he had discovered something. I'll pay 10% more for this plantain fan. Someone immediately snatched it. No matter what secret it was, they had to get it first. Wasn't it just a matter of spirit stones? I'll pay 15% more. I'll pay 20% more. I'll buy this universe ring. I'll pay 10% more. With someone taking the lead, a small auction spontaneously formed in the Forgotten Star Pavilion shop. The highest bidder won. While everyone was clamoring to bid, no one noticed that the wretched guy who first shouted for the plantain fan was the shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion. At this moment, he had already retreated. He quietly retreated to the side and watched as everyone bid 10 times the price for these things that even he knew were trash. If he had known that there was such a method, he wouldn't have had to play tricks in the shabby pavilion and nearly lost his life. The shopkeeper of the shabby pavilion really wanted to know the secret of the cave abode that Yang Chun had bought from him. However, when he thought of the experts who had captured him and the fear he had experienced these days, he didn't dare to think too much. Some things were not something that just anyone could bear. Chapter 2066. The commotion in the Lost Star Pavilion didn't affect Yang Chen's family. On the other hand, when everyone's attention was on the Lost Star Pavilion, Yang Chen's family had already met up. They quietly left the Locket Mountain Market with the things they bought without alarming anyone. In the Mountain River geographical map, Shi Shanshan, who didn't talk much, suddenly talked vividly about her husband's purchase of 2 super magic weapons in the Lost Star Pavilion, and all the women were stunned. If super magic treasures could be bought so casually, then wouldn't these super magic treasures be a little too cheap? Sure enough, when they saw the Immortal beheading saber, they couldn't help laughing. But when they saw Shi Shanshan taking out the sign, all of them burst into laughter. They finally understood what kind of supreme treasures her husband bought. This name was truly fierce and attractive. When Yang Chun took out the pure Yang Immortal sword, all of them couldn't hold it in anymore, and their laughter lasted for a long time. It wasn't easy for her to stop, but when she saw the sign of the pure Yang Immortal sword and the Immortal sword, Sun Qingxue couldn't help but sneer again, and then it triggered a series of chain reactions, and there was another burst of unstoppable laughter. Although the Immortal beheading saber's quality was pretty good, it was trash in the eyes of all of them, so they could only give it to Xiao Tian to play with. This was also how Yang Chen dealt with it. He threw it to Xiao Tian and let the latter do whatever he wanted with it. But the pure Yang Immortal sword couldn't be thrown away so easily. Otherwise, wouldn't Yang Chun cry himself to death? Holding onto the pure Yang Immortal sword, Yang Chun formally said to Shi Shanshan, "Shanshan, it's time for you to change your natal flying sword." As he spoke, he extended the pure Yang Immortal sword over. Yang Chen's words were very formal. The women couldn't help but stare blankly. Everyone immediately understood that the flying sword in Yang Chen's hand was probably not ordinary. Especially Shi Shanshan. She recalled that she had bought the Immortal beheading saber as a joke, but the pure Yang Immortal sword was bought by Yang Chun of his own accord. There was no need to ask to know the difference between the two. However, he didn't expect that she would be so indifferent in front of a real, celestial sword. She even thought that it was an ordinary item. Fortunately, Yang Chun was Shi Shanshan's husband, and he had always shown that he had excellent eyesight. Shi Shanshan didn't think there was anything wrong with her poor eyesight. Her pursuit had always been extreme offensive power. The supreme pure Yang sword Qi just happened to satisfy this pursuit of hers. As for the rest, as long as she had good tea to drink and her husband to accompany her, nothing else mattered. Let me see. Sun Qingxue always took advantage of her young age and insisted on looking at the sword. Yang Chen also wouldn't disregard her curiosity at this time. He reached out and handed it over. Sun Qingxue took the pure Yang Immortal sword. After carefully probing it with her divine sense, she didn't find anything. The flying sword wasn't very big. After checking inch by inch, she still didn't find anything. She could only pout bitterly and hand the flying sword to Shi Wushuang next to her. Shi Wushuang also looked for a long time. She really couldn't see anything, So she handed it to the next person. In this way, the sword was handed over to Gao Yu. The women in front really couldn't see anything, which made them very discouraged. Their husband had already said that there was a problem with the flying sword, but they still couldn't see what the problem was. This kind of feeling was really depressing. The senior who refined the flying sword spent almost hundreds of years to hide the real flying sword. If you want to find it in such a short time, aren't you looking down on the senior's hard work? Yangchen noticed this sign and smiled casually. The women thought that it made sense, but Sun Qingxue was still not convinced. Then, husband, you can see the problem at a glance. Husband has been relying on his eyesight for most of his life. If I can't even see this, how can I save so much for you? Yang Chun retorted to Sun Qingxue angrily. Sun Qingxue stuck out her tongue mischievously. She hurriedly ran to Yang Chen's side and acted like a spoiled child, telling him not to be angry. The atmosphere quickly became harmonious again. This flying sword feels really strange. Gao Yu is a refining expert, but she still felt that the flying sword was a little different in her hands. Sister, tell me quickly, I'm getting impatient. Sun Qingxue hurriedly urged. Not only her, but the other women were also waiting for the answer. I can't tell, but I always feel that something is wrong. Gao Yu felt that something was wrong, but she couldn't say it specifically, which made the women very depressed. Husband, you should remind it. Sure Shan was also waiting anxiously, but this thing was hers after all, so she didn't act so anxious. Seeing that the sisters were so curious, Sure Shan could only ask her husband. You, think about that part of the courtyard wall in the cave, and then try the inside of the flying sword. They were all his women, so Yangchen wouldn't keep hiding it. So he suggested. Gao Yu's eyes lit up. Yes, this is the feeling. She immediately checked it carefully again, and a smile finally appeared on her face. However, she knew what it was, but she didn't directly point it out. Instead, she handed it to Sun Qingxue and let her find the answer herself. The hint was so obvious, and the women obviously had a way to solve it. Soon, Sun Qingxue also found the problem. Then, the women looked over one by one and finally understood the secret of the flying sword. In the end, the flying sword still fell into the hands of Sure Shan. Sure Shan got it, and according to her husband's instructions, she checked it bit by bit and finally found that there was something wrong with the tip of the sword. There was a small point on the tip of the sword that was smaller than the tip of a needle, which gave people a feeling that they couldn't see through it. At first, Yang Chun found that the size of a rice grain was a little big, and it was even smaller than the tip of a needle. And the part closest to the tip of the sword, if one didn't pay attention, they would think that it was already outside of the flying sword. That senior really put in a lot of effort to hide this thing, but they didn't know what was inside. But now that they found the problem, how should they open it next? Sure Shan looked at her husband. Activate the sword chi with all your strength, and open the barrier at that point. Yang Chun smiled and pointed, just like how you broke the courtyard wall, but be more precise. This wasn't a problem, but Sure Shan wasn't the Sure Shan of the past. She knew that she would definitely be weak if she activated the sword chi with all her strength, so she directly leaned into Yang Chen's arms. As long as she activated the sword chi, she would fall into her husband's arms. Sun Qingxue urged Sister Sure to hurry up, and Sure Shan was finally ready. Then, she condensed the sword chi into the thinnest strand and attacked the barrier with all her strength. With a soft sound, Sure Shan directly fell into Yang Chen's arms. In Sure Shan's hands, a strong aura was suddenly emitted, and it was extremely sharp. Chapter 2067. As soon as the sword chi came out, the women who were not far away all felt a bone-chilling chill. Even Zhou Xianying and Lady Fenghua, who were in the fairy Immortal realm, were no exception. They were forced back a few feet by the sword chi. This was just an ownerless sword chi, and it was already so terrifying. What if it was a life flying sword that had been refined? Your life flying sword can no longer withstand the supreme, pure yang sword chi. This pure yang immortal sword happens to be of the metal attribute, so it can completely withstand the sword chi. Yang Chun was not afraid of the sword chi at all. He hugged Sure Shan and said, when you can completely refine this sword, maybe there will be other benefits. Sure, Shan Shan just didn't like to interact with outsiders, but it didn't mean that she didn't like to be with her husband. Especially now, lying in her husband's arms, feeling her husband's love, even her own life flying sword was so considerate. That kind of thick happiness made her almost don't want time to flow. Maybe it was because it had been sealed for a long time. The sword chi suddenly burst out a bit frightening. After a while, the frightening sword chi subsided, and the women could slowly approach. Hearing what Yang Chun had just said to Sure Shan Shan, the women actually felt the same sweetness in their hearts. Yang Chun took care of Sure Shan Shan like this today, and the next day it would be their own. They were not jealous of this at all, they were just happy. However, such a powerful immortal sword was not so easy to become the life magic weapon of Lotus City. At least Sure Shan Shan could feel the aura of the immortal sword now, but she could only be helpless and could only ask her husband. Don't worry, slowly use the supreme pure Yang sword chi to familiarize and refine it little by little. Yang Shan already had a draft in mind and gave detailed instructions to Sure Shan Shan on how to start refining the immortal sword. As for Sure Shan Shan's original life magic weapon, it was also a good thing, and it couldn't be wasted. After letting Xiao Tian devour the breath of Sure Shan Shan, it can also be transferred to disciples or others, and it will not be buried. After finishing all these, Sure Shan Shan had recovered her energy. She couldn't care about anything else. After giving her husband a kiss, she went back to her room in the Dragon Palace and started to cultivate in seclusion. She wanted to make the pure Yang immortal sword recognize her as its master in the shortest time possible. Yang Chen didn't say anything and directly filled Sure Shan Shan's room with 7th gold mysterious crystals and 8th gold mysterious crystals. They were all mysterious crystals produced after the 7th gold true essence liquid and 8th gold true essence liquid solidified under high pressure. They contain the purest metal attribute spiritual power and could be used at any time. To refine an immortal sword, it was most suitable to use this most primordial spiritual energy. After settling down Sure Shan Shan, Guy had already seen that Yang Chun must have found something else. She smiled and asked, "It seemed that we can't go back to Chunyang Palace for the time being. Where are we going next?" Yang Chun reached out and took out the jade slip given to him by the shopkeeper of the Lost Star Pavilion, and said with a smile, "There is a very interesting place, an ancient tomb. The Super Immortal's Cave and the pure Yang Immortal Sword were found on the periphery of the ancient tomb. Do you want to go and have a look?" The girls played around a lot and were a little tired of this peaceful life. When they heard Yang Chan say that there was such a good place to explore, they were all excited. Without Gao Yu's answer, the eager expressions of the girls had given Yang Chen the answer. The address of the ancient tomb, recorded on the jade slip, was not far from here. It was in a remote mountain area between the shabby pavilion and the Lost Star Pavilion, and it was easy to find. Before rushing to the place, Yang Chun felt a little strange. It was such an easy place to find, but why did no other cultivators notice it? Only those two fellows. When he reached the address recorded on the jade slip, Yang Chun realized that he had underestimated this ancient tomb. The ancient tomb was located in a very small basin amidst countless mountains and precipitous ridges. However, this basin was very special. This basin could not be seen from the outside at all. At a glance, it was almost the same as the surrounding mountains. There were tall and short pine trees facing the wind and snow. Whether it was with the naked eye or spiritual sense, one would only think that it was a snowy mountain that looked exactly the same as the surroundings. If it were not for those two fellows who had come here and brought out something, Yang Chun would not have been able to find this basin. Perhaps only by trekking over the surrounding snowy mountains would he be able to find such a small basin by chance. Outside the small basin was a very faint illusion array, which served to confuse people. Only after passing through the edge of the illusion array could one see the true appearance of the basin. The basin was not big, about a few hundred feet in radius. It was also very deep. Looking up from the bottom of the basin, one would only be able to see a small patch of the sky. The surroundings were filled with snow-capped peaks and cliffs, but the interior of the basin was as warm as spring. Generally speaking, It was very normal for mountain basins to have such a completely different climate, not to mention that there was a special array to maintain it. However, the strangest thing was that this several hundred feet wide basin only had a huge pine tree, which grew very luxuriantly. Even describing it as a towering tree would seem a bit small. This tree was at least a few thousand feet high. Looking at the wind and snow from the outside, one could only see the crown of this huge tree. Because it grew too tall, it had already broken through the illusion array and reached the outside. Close to the ground, the bark was a few feet above the ground, and there should have been a few big words on it. Perhaps because of the erosion of time and the growth of the tree, the other words could no longer be seen clearly, only leaving behind a huge tomb character. Even if it was this character, only the shape was left. The color had already changed to the color of the pine tree's bark. If one did not have good eyesight, one would not be able to see it. It was also because of this tomb character that the two shopkeepers of the Lost Star Pavilion and the Shabby Pavilion thought that this was an ancient tomb. According to the records of the two brothers entering the first and second level, Yangchen's family had already made their preparations. Each of them held a stick of incense in their hands and knelt towards the tree, as if they were paying respects to their ancestors. After kneeling 3 times and kowtowing 9 times, they placed the incense in front of them. Then, everyone felt their vision blur, and they found themselves in an unfamiliar place. The way they came in from the first level is quite unique. Yangchen looked around and commented with a smile, "No matter what, they only came in after paying respects to their ancestors, so it's not rude." Even though they said that, the girls still bowed towards the tree again, and only then did they begin to look around. The scene in front of them was no longer that of the huge tree, but a huge garden. In the center was a majestic palace, which was decorated with everlasting flowers, green pines, and green cypresses. The ground was also paved with perfectly straight stone slabs. It did not look like a tomb at all, but more like a living garden. Just now, the girls had once again bowed towards the palace. This floor looked very ordinary. It did not seem to be overflowing with spiritual power. It was like an ordinary manor where the natives lived. Chapter 2068. After looking around, there was basically nothing worth paying attention to outside. Even if there was, it would have probably been taken away by those two fellows. With the personality of that shabby pavilion shopkeeper, he probably wouldn't leave anything for Yangchen. However, Yangchen didn't immediately follow the two fellows' instructions to enter the second floor. Instead, he carefully walked around the first floor for a long time, looking at every corner. Although the women were curious, they didn't stop their husband's actions. Anyway, their husband would definitely give them an explanation in the end. At this time, it was better not to disturb their husband's thinking. After Yangchen carefully looked at the outside, he entered the palace with the women. This palace, although it was called a palace, it should actually be a huge morning hall. There were all kinds of white curtains, and the decorations were very elegant. Unfortunately, the things used inside were all ordinary goods. They didn't know whether it was because of the array or something else, but they hadn't decayed until now. There were no tributes on the offering table, only some empty plates which were placed neatly. The most outrageous thing was that where the memorial tablet should have been, there was indeed a huge memorial tablet, but it was completely empty. There was not a single word on it, so no one knew who this memorial tablet belonged to. But even so, Yangchen was still very polite. He took out some tributes and placed them on the empty plates. He prepared incense and candles and worshipped the empty memorial tablet again. After the women finished with their husband, they followed Yangchen to the back of the memorial tablet. There was a huge white wall behind the morning hall, but now the white wall was filled with all kinds of poems and colorful essays with gold paint, filling the entire wall. There were probably millions of words on this wall. Every poem and essay was written in a different font, but they were distributed very rhythmically. Just looking at this wall, there was a unique beauty. There were almost tens of thousands of gaps in the various poems and essays on the wall, and there were no words in the gaps. It was obvious that they were deliberately left empty. There was a square table by the wall, on which were neatly arranged brush racks and inkstones. The golden paint in the inkstones looked very fresh, and the brushes hanging on the brush racks were also of the best quality. The tips were round and strong, as if they could be picked up and used. Junkie, it depends on your craftsmanship. Yangchen smiled and pointed at the pens. The gaps in the wall had been filled in according to the original text. The brush and inkstone had been prepared in this way. According to the two shopkeepers, each time one wanted to enter, the poems, songs, and colorful writings would be different, and the empty words would also be different. Only when one filled in the correct words would the second floor be opened. In addition to filling in the words according to the original text, the font must be the same as the font of the poem. Otherwise, it would be a waste of effort. One wrong word, and the entire wall would have to be rewritten, and another batch of articles would be replaced. Most importantly, there was a time limit for filling in the form. After a certain amount of time was exceeded, they would have to fill in the form again. If one couldn't write, couldn't remember the poem, or even wrote slowly, they would fail and be unable to enter the second floor. Although the two shopkeepers had been cultivating for a long time, everyone was usually immersed in cultivation. At most, they had one or two small hobbies. Who would work hard on this? Moreover, this kind of poetry, songs, and colorful writings was just appreciating it. Who would have nothing better to do than memorize it? It was not like they were going to be the top scorer, so what was the point of memorizing these things? Because of this, the two shopkeepers have been stuck at this level for decades. Finally, they managed to enter the second floor by deceiving and running into the right one. Moreover, they had only entered once, and they would never have the chance to enter again. Among them, Yangchen's calligraphy was not bad, and Zhou Xining also dabbled a little, but the best was Tao Junkie. Among the zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, the zither was Zhou Xining, the chess was Shi Wushuang, the calligraphy was Tao Junkie, and the painting was the Murong sisters. Therefore, Yang Chun said that Tao Junkie was the most suitable. After explaining the rules, the girls also understood. Tao Junkie was a little hesitant. With so many missing words, she was not sure that she could remember them one by one. Needless to say, the one responsible for saying the answer must be Yang Chen. Yang Chen had a good reputation for reading a lot of books since he was in the mortal world. Why did everyone say that Yang Chen had good eyesight? Wasn't it because he was knowledgeable? Tao Junkie and Yang Chen cooperated. Yang Chen said a word, and Tao Junkie filled in a word according to the appropriate font. Although this wall was high, it was not difficult for these cultivators. In a short time, hundreds of words were filled. These poems and essays covered a wide range, and they must also be in the original text, which was Yang Chen. If it was someone else, it was estimated that they could only try their luck. Even Yang Chen was secretly surprised in the process of filling in the words. There were a few poems which were obviously not works of the spiritual world of the mortal world. They clearly came from the immortal world. It was unexpected that they would appear here. There was no need to ask. Just based on this point, it could be concluded that this tomb must be related to a big shot in the immortal world. How could the two shopkeepers know the poems and essays of the immortal world? It was already a great luck to enter the tomb correctly once. It would be strange if they could enter a second time. Tao Junkie cooperated with her husband to fill in the words. At the same time, she did not forget to appreciate these works that she had not paid special attention to before. She could not help but admire her husband more and more. There were so many essays, but her husband did not make a mistake. If everyone did not cultivate, maybe she would also be the wife of scholar. Thinking of this, Tao Junkie was indescribably happy. The girls also had the ability to appreciate. Looking at the colorful wall, each of them had a strange light in their eyes, and they read happily. In less than an hour, thousands of blank places had been filled by Tao Junkie. The strange thing was that nothing happened when she finished. Could it be that she filled in a word wrongly? Junkie put the pen away. Yangshin looked at Tao Junkie holding the pen in a daze and reminded her with a smile. Tao Junkie came to her senses and hurriedly went over to put the pen back on the brush rack. Once the brush that Tao Junkie took away returned to its place, the entire wall began to transform, and soon it became two huge doors. Yang Chun reached out and pushed, and the two doors creaked open, revealing the situation inside. Everyone strode in and began to observe their surroundings. After entering, there was a huge courtyard. It looked like the front yard of a manor. On both sides were two neat rows of rooms, and in front of it was a hall. There were several weapon racks on both sides of the courtyard, but the weapon racks were empty. The rooms on both sides were also empty, as if they had been ransacked. Seeing this, Yang Chen smiled. He finally knew where the old things in Poor Acid Pavilion and Lost Star Pavilion came from. Chapter 2069. This courtyard wasn't very big, and there were only so many things. Then there was the courtyard wall. If one looked at it from a functional point of view, it could at most be regarded as a gatehouse or a front hall, especially those weapon racks. It was simply a blatant indication that this courtyard could also be used as a martial arts training ground or something. The furnishings in the wing room and the hall were almost swept away, but Yang Chen could easily see from the magic weapons of the Immortal's cave and the medicine garden that he bought that the original empty places should be those bonsai. Using a cave abode and medicine garden as decoration for a front hall, it really made one speechless. But since there were even Immortal World poems and songs on the wall in front of them, it really wasn't a big deal to have these exquisite little things. Everyone very quickly swept through the second floor. Other than some seemingly usable furniture, there was nothing left. As for the door to the third floor, it was at the back of the hall. Unfortunately, the door was tightly shut and couldn't be opened at all. If it was an ordinary cultivator's tomb, Yang Chen might not have wanted to look for clues so complicatedly and would have directly broken through the door. Now that he knew that it was an immortal monarch's tomb, he couldn't just casually enter. Who knew what deadly things were inside? The things placed in the front hall already had a huge cave abode and a pure yang immortal sword. One could only imagine how terrifying the things inside were. The door was very easy to see, but no one found a way to open it. The two shopkeepers of Shabby Pavilion and Lost Star Pavilion only managed to come here and ransack everything on the second floor, but they didn't even touch the edge of the third floor. Look around. There must be some clues that everyone missed. Yang Chen was also looking around carefully. At the same time, he instructed the girls to search carefully. Everyone knew that this was a rare opportunity, so they were especially attentive, wishing that they could not let go of even the slightest abnormality. It was just that this second floor had already been ransacked by the two shopkeepers once, and the things might have been touched. How difficult would it be to find any clues? After searching for a long time, no one found any conspicuous marks. Yang Chen stood in the courtyard and looked carefully according to the layout of the cave abodes of the experts in the Heavenly Court. He was thinking about what was missing here. There didn't seem to be anything unusual in the courtyard. Yang Chen strolled into the hall. The furnishings in the hall were a little complicated. There were seats for the host and the guest, tables, chairs, pillars, and so on. Finally, his gaze stopped at the wall facing the door. The host and the guest sat on either side of the wall in the middle. According to the usual arrangement, there should be a central hall here. But now it was indeed empty. Needless to say, it must have been plundered by the two shopkeepers. But on the empty wall, there was a faint slanted shadow. If one didn't look carefully, they would think that it was the shadow of one of the eaves in the hall. There was nothing there, and spiritual sense could not detect it. However, if one looked carefully with the naked eye, they could see it. While Yang Chen was thinking about it, he immediately attracted the attention of the women. Everyone was looking at the place Yang Chen was looking at, and they were puzzled. What do you guys think this slanted shadow looks like? Yang Chen suddenly asked. Two heads were better than one. With so many people thinking together, they would definitely be more thorough than him. It's like a stroke. It's like a slanted pagoda. The women each said their own imaginations. There were many different opinions, but Yang Chen always felt that there was something missing. It's like a hanging sword. Suddenly, a concubine said this sentence, which made Yang Chen's eyes lit up. Wasn't it? This slanted angle was clearly a sword hanging diagonally. Normally, if a wealthy family had a treasured sword, wouldn't it be hung up like this? Everything was immediately clear. Why would there be two super magic weapons on the second floor of this tomb? And one of them was a pure yang immortal sword. Could it be that the immortal sword and the giant cave were the keys to the third floor? He praised the little concubine, and the concubine was so happy that she almost lost her composure. The women also understood some of the key points, and couldn't help but praise their husband's luck and good eyesight again. If it wasn't for his super luck, how could he encounter such good things in the cold, acid pavilion and the Lost Star Pavilion? If it wasn't for his good eyesight, how could he find rare treasures among so many ordinary magic weapons? Now that the pure young immortal sword was still being refined by Sir Shan Shan, she couldn't be disturbed for the time being. Fortunately, she was only refining it at the initial stage this time, leaving her own divine sense imprint. It shouldn't take too long. Everyone just had to cultivate and wait. As everyone expected, Sir Shan Shan didn't take too long this time. However, that was relative. The level of the immortal sword was too high. Even with Sir Shan Shan's cultivation, using the supreme, pure yang sword chi to refine it and leaving her own divine sense imprint, it still took half a year for it to become obedient. When Sir Shan Shan came out of seclusion and saw everyone waiting, she asked for the reason, took out the immortal sword, and handed it to Yang Chun. Yang Chun held the pure yang immortal sword and slowly leaned the immortal sword against the angle of the shadow on the wall. This was the moment that everyone guessed the answer after such a long time. All the girls held their breaths and waited for the result to appear. Just when Yang Chun held the pure yang immortal sword and was half an inch away from the wall, the shadow on the wall suddenly flickered. After a flash of color, an empty scabbard appeared and hung diagonally on the wall. Seeing this scene, all the girls felt relieved. That concubine's guess was right, husband's guess was also right. This was clearly the key. When the scabbard appeared, Yang Chun didn't say anything and kept the pure yang immortal sword in the scabbard. With a light click, the immortal sword returned to the scabbard. The originally black and inconspicuous scabbard suddenly became dazzling. After the light flashed, an extremely gorgeous treasure sword quietly hung on the wall, making people unable to look away. A light click sound came from afar. It seemed like the latch of a door was opened. Yang Chun also let out a long sigh. Opening the door really needed to rely on the immortal sword. This level didn't test one's literary talent or memory, but one's eyesight. If one couldn't find the pure yang immortal sword among so many ordinary magic treasures, the scabbard wouldn't have appeared, and naturally, the door to the third level wouldn't have been opened. The two shopkeepers didn't have Yang Chen's eyesight, so they could only return in defeat at this level. However, Yang Chun relied on the memories from his previous life and the experience he had accumulated in this life to successfully open the door to the third level. The door was already open. Yang Chun held the immortal sword in the scabbard and took it off the wall with a light shake. The door didn't move at all. It meant that the immortal sword was still allowed to be taken away. Yang Chun also let out a sigh of relief. If the immortal sword couldn't be taken away, then Sir Shan Shan wouldn't have a life-bound magic treasure. Chapter 2070. She had just come out of seclusion and refined the pure yang immortal sword. And in the blink of an eye, she had a matching immortal sword scabbard. Sir Shan Shan was overjoyed. If it weren't for the presence of so many people, Sir Shan Shan's face wouldn't be able to let go. She might have already gone up and left a kiss for her husband. In front of outsiders, Sir Shan Shan was a cold and proud plum fairy. But in front of her husband, she was still his beloved wife. The door was already open, and now it was time for everyone to enter. The women were a little impatient. After waiting for more than half a year, it was finally time to taste their long-cherished wish. Standing in front of the door, Yang Chun suddenly hesitated. There were two super magic treasures in the front hall of the second floor, the immortal sword and the super large cave mansion. The immortal sword was the key to open the door of the third floor. Then what was the super large cave mansion? Yang Chun didn't think that this immortal monarch's arrangement was an accidental misunderstanding. This could only mean that everything had a purpose. It depended on whether people could understand his arrangement or not. What was the use of the super large cave mansion? To accommodate many people? Or was it just like the last time? It was actually used to resist a super attack? At the thought of the latter possibility, Yang Chen's whole body turned cold. What kind of terrifying attack would need to be resisted by a super large cave mansion with a radius of 3 million miles? If it was really as he guessed, as long as he entered this door, he would definitely encounter an unimaginable terrifying attack. If the person who came only found that the Immortal's sword opened the door, but did not find the super large cave mansion, then even if a Zenith Heaven Golden Immortal came in, there would only be a dead end. When the women saw Yang Chen stop at the door, they all felt very strange. After asking, the women also felt a little scared. Fortunately, her husband was thoughtful. If he went in without any hesitation, who knew what kind of terrifying consequences he would encounter? This was clearly a huge chain of events. It seemed simple, but in fact, it was interconnected. If there was a place that he didn't think of, then the outcome would probably be very different. What Yang Chen was most worried about now was that there were more than 2 super magic treasures in the front hall. If there was a third one, it would probably be a disaster for his family. After all, Yang Chen hadn't seen all of the goods sold by the Poor Acid Pavilion and the Lost Star Pavilion. It was inevitable that he would miss something. Even if there was a super large cave dwelling that could save his life, it would be a bit of a fool's dream if he wanted to advance further. It's just that his footsteps had already arrived, and then he stopped because he was worried that there might be a third magic weapon. Not to mention the women. Even Yang Chen himself felt a little unwilling. After thinking about it, Yang Chen decided to go in. After all, just as Yang Chen had thought, the super huge cave residence was definitely more than enough to protect itself. If the situation Yang Chen described really happened, the worst that could happen was that they wouldn't be able to advance to the next level. However, if they didn't take a look, they wouldn't be willing to do so. A Ling, prepare the Mountain River geographical map. Everyone will hide in it. Yang Chen finally ordered Gong Sunling and prepared to enter the 3rd floor. The super giant Immortal's cave had been refined by the Mountain River geographical map. And with Yang Chen's knowledge, even if the Mountain River geographical map has not yet completely refined the Super Immortal's cave, the protection power was better than that of the Super Immortal's cave. In particular, the Mountain River geographical map was Gong Sunling's life source magic weapon, and there was also Yang Chen's 3rd primordial spirit as the weapon spirit. When necessary, the husband and wife could control the Mountain River geographical map at the same time, which would increase their safety. The women obediently entered the Mountain River geographical map, and then watched Gong Sunling control the Mountain River geographical map to walk into the portal of the 3rd floor. As if to prove Yang Chen's worries, Gong Sunling had just controlled the Mountain River geographical map to enter the 3rd floor, and the portal behind her slammed shut, and then the attack like a heavenly tribulation began directly. Boom! A thunderbolt directly exploded on the Mountain River geographical map. The land of tens of thousands of miles in the Mountain River geographical map was directly shaken and turned into powder. After the first, it was followed by the second, the third, as if there was no end. In the Mountain River geographical map, the land of tens of thousands of miles had been completely turned into the finest powder, and all the creatures on that land were the same. This is the heavenly tribulation. Yang Chen and the 3rd primordial spirit reacted at the same time. This was not an ordinary attack at all. It was simply a heaven immortal tribulation. Yes, it was the heaven immortal tribulation that the cultivators of the spiritual world had to undergo when they wanted to ascend, but the heavenly tribulation in this place was more than 10 times stronger than the ordinary heaven immortal tribulation. Ordinary cultivators of the spiritual world, if they encountered 10 times the heaven immortal tribulation, would definitely die. Probably only cultivators above the 5th grade of Xian Immortal could barely withstand such an attack. But the problem was that this was a heaven immortal tribulation. Once a Xian Immortal master passed the heaven immortal tribulation, what awaited him was not to smoothly enter the depths of the tomb, but to immediately ascend to the immortal world. If he wanted to see the secrets of the tomb, he would probably not have the chance again. Only by relying on a super magic treasure that had not reached the level of ascension could one safely wait for the opportunity to enter the next level. This was clearly a cave-like magic treasure. How could there be a heaven immortal tribulation here? Yang Chen did not think about this problem for the time being. He focused on resisting the heaven immortal tribulation with the 3rd primordial spirit. The reason why he was together with the 3rd primordial spirit was because Yang Chen had a selfish motive. Yang Chen's Dragon Clan magic treasure, the Golden Bell, was only half refined so far. Last time, Yangchen also relied on the power of the heaven immortal tribulation to achieve such an achievement. But the power of the heaven immortal tribulation last time was normal, far less than the current 10 times power. Wouldn't it be a pity if it was wasted on destroying the super cave abode? After enduring 3 heaven immortal tribulations, Yangchen reacted and began to cooperate with the third primordial spirit. As soon as the third primordial spirit suffered the attack, it immediately directed 1/10 of the heaven immortal tribulation's power to Yangchen. Yangchen took out the golden bell and continued to use the heaven immortal tribulation's power to refine it. 1/10 of the power was the power of an ordinary heaven immortal tribulation, which was more than enough for Yangchen to bear. Next, it would slowly strengthen until it reached the limit that Yangchen could bear. After a few consecutive times, the third primordial spirit had given Yangchen half of the heaven immortal tribulation's power. At this point, Yangchen also found it a little difficult to deal with it, and he should have reached his limit. The heaven immortal tribulation was a heaven immortal tribulation. Compared with the ordinary human immortal tribulation, the earth immortal tribulation contained more powerful and terrifying power. But for Yangchen, who had already seen the golden immortal tribulation, it was an excellent tonic for the golden bell. In a short while, the 10 times the heaven immortal tribulation had passed through 99 heaven immortal tribulations. Under normal circumstances, this situation was considered a success. But here, it was not the end. What followed was the Xian immortal tribulation, which was also the same as the heaven immortal tribulation, 10 times the heaven immortal tribulation. In this way, Yangchen and the third primordial spirit had to work harder and more difficult. Chapter 2071. There was nothing but a vast expanse of white land outside with the naked eye. No one dared to use their divine sense to explore. Gong Sunling just urged the geographical map to find the right direction and rushed inside frantically. She didn't know how far she had gone after such a long time. Looking at Yangchen resisting the power of the heavenly tribulation with the geographical map, the women were a little moved and asked to share part of it. This was not a difficult thing for the third primordial spirit. It only needed to distribute 1% of the power of the heavenly tribulation to the women. Besides, there were 42 women in total. If each of them shared 1% of the power, it would add up to almost half of the power. In this way, the power that the geographical map had to bear was very small. He didn't know what was going on. Yangchen only discovered now that after entering the third layer, the golden immortal tribulation in his sea of consciousness stopped disturbing him. Yangchen was able to control the golden bell to absorb the power of the tribulation. After the first heaven immortal tribulation was easily passed, the next Xian immortal tribulation was not so easy. At this point, the space in the mountain river geographical map was broken piece by piece, and it was a scene of devastation. However, the third primordial spirit still had a trump card that was more than 1 million cultivators and more than 20 billion natives. The terrifying power was distributed bit by bit, and everyone bore a part of the pressure that they could bear. No matter how terrifying the Xian immortal tribulation was, under the joint efforts of hundreds of Xian immortal masters, millions of cultivators, and nearly 30 billion natives, they still survived. Even if it was the Xian immortal tribulation, only the first few destroyed a part of the space. Most of the space in the geographical map was still intact. However, the cultivators in the geographical map were blessed. Everyone, including Yangchen's family, felt the power of the heaven immortal tribulation more or less. This had immeasurable benefits for their future cultivation. After surviving the 999 profound immortal tribulation, Gong Sun Ling suddenly found that there was a pause in the mountain river geographical map, and there was no road ahead. There was no heavenly tribulation falling from the sky. Gong Sunling gathered her courage and released a trace of divine sense to explore. She found that she was already in another manner. It was a beautiful place, and there was no sign of the horror of the heavenly tribulation. "Husband, we're here." After Gong Sunling gave Yang Chen a smile, she smiled and said, "It should be the real third floor." As soon as his voice fell, a powerful energy surged from outside the mountain river geographical map. The part of the mountain river geographical map that had been destroyed before, under the effect of this magical energy, quickly recovered, and soon it was as good as before. That was not all. There was still a lot of this energy. The third primordial soul immediately began to control this energy to refine the super large cave abode. In just a short while, the super cave abode of 3 million kilometers had been refined by about 100,000 kilometers before it stopped. Yang Chun communicated with his third primordial spirit and silently estimated that the previous heaven immortal tribulation and Xian immortal tribulation would probably be able to destroy most of the cave abode, leaving only the central part, which was less than 100 miles long. This giant cave dwelling was basically for the fated person to enter the third floor from the second floor. As for the demon race creatures inside, it was just an extra bonus. After so many years, no one cared about them. So many of them were bred. After experiencing that kind of terrifying heavenly tribulation, those who were fated, lucky, and powerful would ascend, and those who were not fated, lucky, and powerful would turn into ashes. But under the protection of Yang Chen's family and the mountain river geographical map, most of the demon cultivators in the super large cave abode successfully survived. Perhaps this was another surprise. Yang Chen's main gain was that the process of refining the golden bell had been completed by almost 90%. As long as he experienced another heavenly tribulation, he could completely integrate the golden bell into his body. In the past, Brother Li Cheng estimated that Yang Chen would have to experience 3 to 4 heavenly tribulations before he could refine the golden bell. He didn't expect that he would have such a result after experiencing it once. It was really a pleasant surprise. It was already very calm outside, so everyone carefully came out of the mountain river geographical map. It was strange to say that as soon as they arrived here, the golden immortal tribulation in Yang Chen's sea of consciousness immediately began to rage. This strange movement made Yang Chen have a different feeling about this tomb space. This was a larger manor, with all the facilities in it, all kinds of furniture and decorations. None of them were missing. After all, no one had ever come in here, so it would not be lost. However, this kind of arrangement gave Yang Chen the feeling that it was not a tomb at all. It was clearly prepared for the living, which was very strange. The place where they stopped was a huge yard. The yard was shaded by trees, and the pavilions, bridges, and flowing water could be seen from afar. It was a beautiful manor. The women released their spiritual awareness, but found that the manor was still empty. Could it be that the immortal Sir moved his favorite manor to the tomb after his death? Behind them was a gate, and outside the gate, they could clearly see a vast expanse of white land. Everyone understood that the area outside the gate should be the area where the heavenly tribulation raged. As long as they didn't go out, they would be safe in this manor. With the speed of Gong Sunling's control of the mountain river geographical map, according to the time when the heavenly tribulation fell one by one, the area outside was at least 100,000 miles. If this was the case, this was another sect-level super immortal cave mansion. Not far ahead was a hall, similar to the layout of the front hall on the second floor. Yang Chen looked at it and walked over there. The women also followed behind Yang Chen. In a dangerous place that no one had been to before, it was safer for everyone to gather together. When the spiritual awareness explored before, there was no one here, but when they got closer, everyone's expression changed drastically. In front of them, there were 2 rows of women in maid costumes standing neatly. They could avoid the spiritual awareness of the women. They were by no means ordinary powerhouses. Everyone stopped in their tracks and stared at the 2 teams of women vigilantly while waiting for their husband's instructions. Yang Chen also saw those women, but he had a strange feeling in his heart. Those women didn't seem to be living people. At least they didn't have any vitality. They don't seem to be alive. Not only Yang Chen had this feeling, but even the women had the same feeling. After Sun Qingxue said a sentence, the other party didn't respond at all, and his body kept that position without moving. It seemed that he really wasn't a living person. Could it be a burial? A possibility flashed in Yang Chen's mind. He took a deep breath and took a few steps forward to take a closer look. Those women really weren't alive, but regardless of their figure, appearance, and clothes, they were simply lifelike. He didn't know how they became like this. Chapter 2072. There seemed to be only one possibility, and that was that these maids had used some kind of technique when they were alive to become what they were now. But in this case, weren't these maids a living statue? There were 8 maids standing side by side here. The women walked around in other places, and there was a burst of exclamations. In the entire manor, there were probably thousands of young and beautiful maids who had become like this, and their spiritual senses could not detect them, but they also had no vitality. It seemed that when the immortal monarch was buried, he buried all the maids in his entire residence with him. This feeling made Yang Chun very uncomfortable. Yang Chun cared a lot about the people around him, and he asked himself that even if he died unfortunately, he would not be willing to let any of his wives, concubines, and maids be buried with him. On the contrary, he hoped that they could live as well as possible, which was the greatest memorial for him. The person in front of him, however, buried all the maids who served him in the entire manor with him. Although this was normal in the eyes of the big shots, Yang Chun could not turn a blind eye to it. Perhaps this was the difference between Yang Chun and the big shots. Yang Chen's face was seen by all the women. Madame Fanghua asked carefully. After getting the answer, all the women were moved in their hearts. Their husband was deeply affectionate, and it was not in vain for them to be husband and wife. After sighing with emotion, everyone realized that there were no men in the entire manor, and all of them were living statues of the maids. It seemed that the immortal monarch himself was also a lecherous person, which was why he made such arrangements. But this was not surprising. Wasn't their husband the same? In the Dragon Palace, besides Yang Chun, which man was there? The maids were distributed everywhere in the manor, and at a glance, it was obvious that they were doing all kinds of work. Then, needless to say, the master was either in the main hall of the manor or in the master's bedroom in the back. Walking through one deep manor after another, Yang Chun and the women finally arrived at the main hall. The layout here was very elegant, and, at a glance, it was the residence of a scholar. Thinking of the poems and songs on the second floor, the owner of this manor must be very fond of literature. There was no one in the main hall. Yang Chun and the others did not casually touch the furnishings. Yang Chun's family was not like the 2 shopkeepers who had no eyesight. That kind of locust crossing the border could not be done. When they reached the backyard, they ran into trouble. At the same time, Yang Chun was sure that the owner of the manor was in the backyard. It was not accurate to say that it was troublesome. To be precise, it was a barrier, a transparent barrier. Everyone stopped in front of the barrier, their footsteps blocked, unable to advance any further. This barrier was very gentle, unlike the one that the Zhao family had set up in the core of the trial grounds. If one was not careful, they would be killed. This barrier only gently blocked everyone outside, not allowing anyone to casually enter. There was no other arrangement. Yang Chun reached out and touched the invisible but palpable barrier. No matter how he thought about it, it felt familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen this barrier before. The women were also thinking hard, but they had no clue. Even their husband couldn't tell the origin of this thing. They were probably also helpless. The heavenly tribulation outside clearly told everyone how terrifying the arrangement here was. No one dared to use violence to break this barrier. The eyes of the women could only focus on their husband to see if he had a solution. Yang Chen's mind was spinning. He thought of all kinds of barriers that he had seen in the immortal world, but none of them seemed to match the characteristics of the barrier in front of him. It was gentle, but full of majesty. Standing in front of the barrier, it was almost impossible to have the idea of breaking it with violence. He must have seen this kind of barrier before. After thinking hard for a while, the shadow of a barrier finally stopped in Yang Chen's mind. Jade Pool. This was the feeling that the barrier outside the Jade Pool gave people. At the thought of this, Yang Chen almost broke out in a cold sweat. An immortal lord's tomb suddenly appeared in the spiritual world. What kind of concept was this? Which immortal lord died in the spiritual world? Yang Chen didn't have this concept in his mind. Wasn't this a big joke? A dignified, immortal lord actually died in the spiritual world? How is this possible? However, be it the poems of the immortal world, the barrier of the jade pool, or even the profound immortal tribulation, it clearly told Yang Chun that this wasn't an illusion. It was really set up by an immortal lord from the immortal world. No, it's not the same. After pondering for a while, Yang Chun came to another conclusion. This barrier was different from the one in the jade pool. Of course, there are only a few differences. This barrier didn't have the aura of a king, but an overlord. The overbearing aura that was mixed with gentleness was something that Yang Chun had never experienced before. There was a domineering aura that was mixed with indomitable will. It was vaguely very similar to Shi Shanshan's aura. At the thought of this, Yang Chun felt that he seemed to have found some clues. The pure Yang immortal sword that Shi Shanshan had just obtained, and Shi Shanshan's supreme pure Yang sword Qi cooperated seamlessly with Shi Shanshan's supreme pure Yang sword Qi. Even the attributes were so compatible. Wasn't this too much of coincidence? Coupled with the aura that was being emitted from the barrier, Yang Chun didn't dare to believe it. Could it really be his guess? Shanshan. Yang Chun called out to Shi Shanshan. Shi Shanshan didn't worry about him. She quickly walked to her husband's side and waited for Yang Chun's instructions. Yang Chun didn't say anything for a long time. He was still weighing whether he should do this or not. He looked up and saw the sheathed immortal sword in Shi Shanshan's hand. He suddenly felt relieved. Since she had even given him the immortal sword, she probably wouldn't care about such a small matter. Shanshan used the immortal sword to release a supreme, pure Yang sword Qi. Yang Chun pointed to Shi Shanshan and said, "Don't use your full strength. Just tap on the barrier gently." The women were confused by her husband's words, but no one said anything. Shi Shanshan followed her husband's instructions and drew her immortal sword. She tapped the barrier gently with the tip of the sword. A tiny sword Qi that was almost undetectable rushed out from the tip of the sword and pierced the barrier. After the sword Qi penetrated, the barrier didn't react at all. After a while, it was still the same. Just as the women looked at their husband in shock and waited for him to explain, something strange happened. The transparent barrier that everyone was helpless against started to melt rapidly from the point where Shi Shanshan's sword Qi touched. Amidst the sizzling sound, everyone could see the edges of the barrier disappear bit by bit. Finally, it completely disappeared. Looking at the scene in front of him, countless thoughts flashed through Yang Chen's mind. Could it really be the person I guessed? Impossible, right?